Chapter 678. Chen Duo had been distressed for the past 2 days. The poem Partridge in the Sky, and the phrase, I'm afraid we'll meet in a dream, had spread his name throughout the entire Feng State City. Although his name was well known in Feng State City before this, the meaning was very different. Foppish, idiot, prodigal. This was what people thought of him before. Foppish, idiot, prodigal, poem seller. This was what people thought of him now. He needed to prove himself and prove that he didn't buy the poem. He wasn't an idiot. He just didn't want others to know about it. However, the brother who sold him the poem had disappeared. The other party appeared mysteriously and disappeared mysteriously. He hadn't appeared since that night. It was as if the other party had appeared to save him that day. He didn't know the brother's name or appearance. The only clue he had was that alley. Therefore he asked his father to buy the restaurant across the alley the next day. At this time he was sitting in the restaurant's lobby. From time to time he would look outside. If he saw someone stopping at the alley he would go out and ask them. However, it had been 2 days and he still hadn't seen the person he was looking for. Sigh. He sighed as he walked out of the alley again and returned to the restaurant. Li Yi leaned against the wall outside a shop. Occasionally he would look inside and be cut by the gazes of the 2 women at the door. He looked up and saw that the sign of Rui Workshop was very eye-catching. He couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. He didn't know which bastard had copied the style of his own underwear, but he had even copied the name of the shop. Not only did he plagiarize but he also didn't want to let him in. Mississippi Lou was injured. If something happened to her inside he wouldn't be able to help her in time. He had brought Mississippi Lou out to shop during the day to buy some clothes and daily necessities. She had been in the underwear shop for a quarter of an hour. It seemed like she wouldn't be able to come out anytime soon. Li Yi leaned against the wall in boredom. He looked at the people coming and going on the street. When his eyes swept across a certain alley, he was slightly stunned. Sigh, did she leave Feng State? Chen Duo walked out of the alley again and sighed. When he was about to enter the restaurant, he suddenly heard a voice coming from the alley behind him. Are you satisfied with the poem? Hearing the familiar voice, Chen Duo stopped in his tracks. He immediately turned around and said, Brother, you're here. The voice just now came from inside the alley. He quickly walked into the alley and when he was halfway there, the voice sounded again. All right, just stop there. Chen Duo immediately stopped in his tracks and looked at the corner of the alley, where a corner of a shirt could be seen. Are you satisfied with the words? The voice rang out again. Yes, I'm very satisfied. Chen Duo nodded fiercely. He had never bought such a valuable thing in his life. Now that he recalled the expressions of those people that night, he felt so happy that he wanted to shout out loud. As long as you're satisfied. I'm leaving. When the voice rang out again, a copper coin flew out from the corner of the alley. Received a good review, returned 1 coin. Chen Duo caught the copper coin, and after being stunned for a moment, his expression changed. He quickly took a few steps forward and then seemed to remember something. He stopped and anxiously said, Brother, please wait. A moment later, a voice came from the other side. Is there anything else? A smile appeared on Chen Duo's face as he said, I wonder if brother still has poems for sale? The voice paused and asked, How many songs do you want? 10 songs. Just like before, 10,000 taels of silver. According to your rules, buy 5 and get 1 free, buy 10 and get 3 free. That's a total of 13 songs. Are there any special requirements? Just like the previous song. Love between a man and a woman? Chen Duo nodded vigorously. Yes, that's it. The person on the other side did not speak immediately, as if he was thinking. After a while, the voice sounded again. Pay a deposit of 5,000 taels first, and the item you want will be delivered to you by tonight. Chen Duo took out a stack of banknotes from his pocket. After splitting them in half, he walked to the corner of the room and carefully handed them over. 5,000 taels. Aren't you afraid that I'll run away with the money? Li Yi leaned against the wall and asked. I trust you, brother. The voice came from the other side. Besides, it's only 5,000 taels, but 5 days' worth of pocket money? Li Yi waved his hand and said, Wait at the entrance of the alley before it gets dark. Thank you, brother. Chen Duo beamed with joy and asked again, May I know your name, brother? Then, as if he remembered something, he immediately said, I'm sorry I broke the rules. Brother, please don't blame me. It's fine. The voice was very straightforward this time. Fine, I won't change my name or my surname, just call me Li Han. Where did you go? When Li Yi walked back, Mississippi Lou was standing in front of the underwear store, holding two exquisite bags in her hands as she looked at him and asked, "Just walking around?" Li Yi took the bags from her hands and said, "Let's go and take a look in front. Catch him quickly." As soon as he said that, an anxious voice came from behind. A figure ran past Li Yi at lightning speed, followed by a middle-aged fat man who was panting heavily. When the fat man ran to Li Yi's side, he finally could not run anymore. With one hand on his waist he shouted weakly, catch the thief, it's you?" Li Yi looked at the middle-aged fat man and asked in surprise. The fat man only glanced at him, took a moment to catch his breath, and continued to run forward. Li Yi shook his head. The jade pendant given to him by the old emperor had only been sold for 1,000 taels of silver to this fatty. To think that this fellow would end up like this. From the looks of it, the thief must have stolen something valuable from him. "Let's go." The thief had already disappeared. Li Yi looked at Mississippi Lu. There was still a ready-made clothing store in front. They would go there for a while before going home to cook. In front, the middle-aged fat man held his waist and said to a constable, the money bag has been stolen. There's also a piece." He paused for a moment. "It's the money bag has been stolen." Chis. The constable looked at the direction he was pointing at, waved his hand, and immediately chased after the thief with the other constables behind him. In a dilapidated alley somewhere. Today's harvest is not bad." A man waved to the two people beside him as if he was showing off. "There's actually so much silver." After saying that, he spread out his other hand and said, "There's also a piece of broken jade. I don't know how much it's worth, let's find a place to pawn it tomorrow." Not long after, the few people came out of the alley with satisfaction and bumped into a person who was walking towards them. "Damn, are you blind? It's you again." The man looked at the man who bumped into him and grabbed him by the collar, mocking, "Why didn't you ask me if I've heard of your Padian Empress today? Protector, it's him." The man pulled on the man's clothes and said loudly. As soon as he said that, more than 10 figures rushed out from a nearby house. The person in front was a man in blue. At this moment he was looking at the few people with gloomy eyes. He waved his hand and said, "Arrest them." The yellow-clothed people behind him rushed forward. "Damn, there's actually an accomplice." The man's expression changed and he kicked away the man who was grabbing his clothes. The two people beside him had already reacted and madly ran forward. "Chase," the man in blue ordered. Everyone immediately responded and chased in the direction that the three people had escaped in. "Damn, I'm dead tired." Not long after, the man and the two people stood on the street, bent over and panting heavily. At this point, those people finally didn't dare to chase them anymore. "Tired? If you're tired, then take a rest." A voice came from behind. The man suddenly turned around and saw that the constable had placed a knife on his neck. Immediately, other constables came over and locked the three people together. "Why don't you come with us?" The leading constable waved his hand, and a few constables carried the three dejected people towards the direction of the yamen. Chapter 679. You can decide what to do with this case. I'm going to sleep for a while. Somewhere in Fengzhou City, the county magistrate yawned and waved his hand to the bailiffs. He then leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He was getting old and his body couldn't take it anymore. Yesterday he had fought with his new concubine until dawn, but now he couldn't take it anymore. "Yes, Your Excellency." The bailiff cupped his hands and bowed. "Tell me, how many times have you done this?" He walked down and patted the man's face. The big man sighed and said, "I can't count." "You have hands and feet. You can do anything. Why do you have to steal and rob?" The bailiff looked at him and said, "Now that you're out, find some serious work. Don't let me see you in the county jail again. Alas, life is hard." The big man sighed and said in a melancholy tone, "It's impossible to work. I'm not born for this. If I don't steal and rob, I'll starve to death." The bailiff slapped his head and waved his hand saying, "Take him away. See if there's anything missing." Another bailiff pulled a bag of money from the big man's body and threw it to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man opened the bag and looked inside. His face was gloomy. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "There's nothing missing." He couldn't tell anyone about the jade pendant that he had planned to trade in the black market. Although it would cost him nearly 10,000 taels of silver, it was a crime that could get him beheaded for hiding an item belonging to the royal family. He couldn't let the government know about it. Fortunately, the big man had already thrown away the jade pendant. Although he was distressed about the money, he didn't feel so bad when he thought that it was from a guy who didn't know how to pawn it for 1,000 taels of silver. What a pity. He had originally planned to pay him more if he came to redeem it in the future. However, most of the things that were pawned in the pawnshop were equivalent to being sold. The possibility of redeeming them was very small. If he was lucky, he could make a net profit of 10,000 taels of silver. Although his heart ached taking a step back compared to his life, none of this seemed that important. The burly man was being escorted by 2 bailiffs. Just as he was about to leave, he seemed to have thought of something. He stopped and said, "That's right, there's also a jade pendant. Since it's not worth much money, you can take it back as well. That way you won't be able to say that I hid it from you." The burly man cupped his waist and said, "It's here. Brother Constable, help me take it." Hearing this, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly. He immediately said, "Nonsense, I only lost my purse. How can there be any jade pendant? You stole it from someone else. You must have remembered wrongly." The burly man was stunned for a moment. He looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Don't tell me you're confused. You lost your jade pendant and forgot about it? You really want to postpone it and make me suffer a few more beatings?" The middle-aged man forced himself to calm down and said, "Nonsense. Why would I harm you? Do you think I don't know if I lost the jade pendant or not?" The burly man turned to look at the bailiff and said, "Brother Constable, this guy may have really forgotten that the jade pendant is on my waist. Help me take it. He should remember it when he sees it." The bailiff looked at the 2 of them and felt a little surprised. He felt something from the bulge on the burly man's waist. Crack. The sound of porcelain shattering and tables and chairs overturning came from behind. The county magistrate didn't even bother to pat the dust off his body. He got up from the ground and ran in the direction of the door. He looked at the burly man and pointed at the jade pendant. He asked in shock, This jade pendant, where did you get it?" The burly man was stunned for a moment and looked at the middle-aged man in astonishment. At this moment, the purse in the middle-aged man's hand had fallen to the ground. His face was pale. Plop. His legs turned to jelly. He knelt on the ground and cried, "Sir, please spare my life. Tell me the truth," the county magistrate said sternly. Not long after, the county magistrate hurriedly walked out of the county office. He got on the sedan chair and urged, "Go to King Feng's mansion." King Feng's mansion was a very special existence in Feng province. The highest official in Feng province was the provincial governor, but in fact, it was King Feng's mansion that managed Feng province. This was a special case in the Qi kingdom. Although many princes had fiefs, most of them were remote territories. They only enjoyed rent and lived a good life, but they didn't have any real power. However, the 3rd prince, Zhao Yi, was not one of them. Among the more than 10 princes in the Qi kingdom, he was the only one who had a fief as large as a prefecture and could personally manage the government affairs. He had the power to make some important decisions. The 3rd prince, Zhao Yi, had come to the fief when he was young. It took him more than 10 years to turn a medium-sized prefecture into one of the richest places in the Qi kingdom. Not only did he have a high status in the hearts of the people in Feng province, but he also had a great influence in the neighboring prefectures. At this moment in King Feng's mansion, the prestigious 3rd prince had just put down a letter. Down below, Yang Yanzhou frowned and asked, "Your Highness, why has the 1st prince suddenly come to Feng prefecture?" "What?" Zhao Yi looked out of the window and said, "The imperial censor is accompanying him. He said he's inspecting the prefectures on behalf of my father. He'll arrive in Feng province in a few days." Yang Yanzhou thought about it and said, "The 1st prince won't leave the capital easily. He's not here with good intentions. Your Highness, you should be prepared. This brother of mine?" Zhao Yi sighed. Her tone was rather helpless as she said, "Is there still no news from Chong province?" Yang Yanzhou nodded and said, "Not yet. However, according to the news from the Jing kingdom, it seems that they haven't found him either. There are rumors that he might have met with misfortune." Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "That won't happen. If such a person died because of this, then God must be blind. I believe that we'll meet again one day." Yang Yanzhou didn't say anything. Thinking of that name, some scenes emerged in his mind, and his expression became somewhat enlightened. After a long time, Lili was still as elegant as before. The 2 talked for a while, and then a servant outside the door reported, "The county magistrate of Feng City requests to see you." "Greetings, Your Highness." The county magistrate of Feng City hurriedly came in and bowed to Zhao Yi. "County Magistrate Wu, you don't have to be so courteous. Sit down." Zhao Yi raised his hand and said, "May I know why County Magistrate Wu suddenly came to visit?" County Magistrate Wu respectfully presented a jade pendant with both hands and said, "Your Highness, This jade pendant was accidentally obtained from several bandits today. Yang Yanzhou was surprised. He looked at Zhao Yi and said, Your Highness, isn't this the one that His Majesty rewarded you? It's the Huilong pendant. Zhao Yi took the jade pendant from County Magistrate Wu's hands and smiled. He's here. Coming. Li Yi hurriedly walked into the kitchen. If he was a step late, he would have to make do with egg-fried rice today. Mississippi Lu seemed to have made up her mind this time. She wouldn't stop until she made a dish that could be swallowed. She just felt pity for the ingredients that she had just thrown away as garbage. Some of them were really expensive. Thinking of the 5,000 taels of silver he had just received, he didn't feel so distressed. Out of the 10,000 taels of silver, he had to keep 1,000 taels of silver. When he left, he would redeem the jade pendant. If the old emperor remembered it one day, he couldn't use the excuse that the proud Lolita had lost it every time to fool him. Thinking of the jade pendant, he thought of the stingy pawnshop manager. The value of that jade pendant was certainly more than 1,000 taels of silver. But last time he was in urgent need of money, so he was forced to cheat him. He had always cheated people, and those who cheated him would sooner or later suffer retribution. This was not the second time they met, and he had already lost something important. The next time they met, he would probably lose his head. Therefore it was better to be upright. The heavens were watching, and it was not easy for him to hold on to the integrity of his heart. When the smell of burning came from the kitchen of the small courtyard again, in the prison of the county government, the pawnshop manager knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing. He said in a trembling voice, He was wearing a bamboo hat that day. I really didn't know his identity. Chapter 680. In the county jail, Zhao Yi, the third prince of the Qi kingdom, looked at the pawnbroker and asked, Half a month ago, he wore a bamboo hat and pawned this jade pendant for 1,000 taels of silver? Yes, he used a bamboo hat to cover his face, so I didn't see what he looked like, nor did I know who he was. The pawnbroker said in a trembling voice, Everything I said is true. If there is any falsehood, may I be struck by lightning. Not long after, Zhao Yi came out of the cell, shook his head and said, This dragon pendant was given to me by my father. It is worth 10,000 taels of gold, but I pawned it for 1,000 taels of silver. Brotherly, you look down on me too much. Yang Yanzhou stood beside him, thought for a moment and said, Your Highness, if that's the case, he should be in Fengzhou City now. Zhao Yi nodded and said, He must know the value of this jade pendant, but he pawned it for only 1,000 taels of silver. He must be extremely short of money. He can't go back to the Jing kingdom for the time being, so it's normal for him to hide in the Qi kingdom. He shouldn't have left at this time. Your Highness, who are you looking for? Do you want me to send someone? County Magistrate Wu hesitated for a moment and said. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, No need, you don't need to ask about this matter. Remember to let the pawnbroker go later. County Magistrate Wu was stunned and said, Your Highness, it's a big crime to hide a royal item. Are you going to let him go like this? Zhao Yi smiled and said, It doesn't matter, just do as I said. County Magistrate Wu looked up at him and finally nodded and said, Your Highness, I understand. As they walked out of the county office, Yang Yanzhou turned around and asked, Your Highness, what if he doesn't redeem the jade pendant? Zhao Yi looked at the endless stream of people on the street and said, It's good that he went to redeem it, but it's expected that he didn't. Send more people to investigate in secret these days. Feng State City is not big, so if he is still in the city, we will find him sooner or later. Yang Yanzhou nodded and the two of them walked down the stairs. At the same time, in a courtyard a few streets away, Li Yi scratched his head in confusion. Although he had never paid much attention to the gifts bestowed by the old emperor, he still had some impression of them. Until now, he still couldn't remember when the old emperor had given him that jade pendant. After a while, he still had no clue. He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He had to quickly write out the 13 poems and then go out to buy groceries. All the vegetables at home had been ruined by Mississippi Lu. He had to buy some new ones and send the poem to her to get the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. After this, he would never sell his poems for money again. Not only Su Shi, Li Bai and Qing Guan, but also Lu Yong and Yan Jidao. Every time they wrote a sentence, Li Yi could feel the strong resentment from a different time and space. It's a disgrace, it's really a disgrace. It was not dark yet. Qian Duo stood at the entrance of the alley, waiting patiently. Only when night fell and his feet were about to go numb from standing, did a voice finally come from the alley. Money in one hand, goods in another. Did you bring the silver? Qian Duo was shocked and immediately said, Yes. Something flew out of the darkness. Chen Duoduo reached out and caught it. He heard the voice say, "Here are 5 poems. You can check them first." Chen Duoduo walked to the side and opened it with the light of the lamp. There were a few words that he didn't know, but it should be the real thing. He walked back and handed a stack of banknotes in and said, "This is the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. Brother, please count it." As soon as he finished speaking, he felt that his hand was empty. After a while, another roll of paper flew out. "Money and goods are settled. Goodbye." Hearing the voice coming from the alley, Chen Duoduo hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." The voice said, "Is there anything else?" Chen Duoduo scratched his head and said, "Cash back. Do you want a copper coin? Even a copper coin is money." Chen Duoduo smiled embarrassedly and said, "My father taught me since I was a child that every porridge and meal is hard-earned. I shouldn't spend money recklessly and should be thrifty. Even a copper coin is money. I deserve it. Why don't I want it?" This time, the voice was silent for a long time before it spoke again. "Sorry, there is no cash back this time. I used up my change when I bought vegetables just now." Buying vegetables? Chen Duoduo was stunned and looked ahead in surprise. However, there was no more sound coming from the darkness. "Brother, remember that you still owe me a copper coin." Chen Duoduo shouted to himself. He carefully put away the poems and strode back. As Li Yi walked on the street, he thought that he should have spared him a celery or something. He didn't like to owe people money. Even a copper coin was still a debt. For someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder, there was not much difference between a copper coin and 10,000 taels of silver. When he passed by a city gate, he saw the soldiers at the gate questioning passers-by in the dark. They seemed to be holding something like a portrait in their hands. They were probably chasing after some felons. It seemed that the public security in Fengzhou was not very good. It was better to be careful while walking alone on the street at night. The right thing to do was to go back and sleep with Mississippi Lu. In a restaurant, several dancers were dancing gracefully on a high stage. One of them had a slim figure and graceful movements, which attracted the attention of most people in the hall. A young man raised the wine glass in his hand and looked at Chen Duoduo as he said, "Brother Chen, Miss Shershur thanked you in front of everyone that day. It's a pity that you left early. Otherwise, something wonderful would have happened between you and Miss Shershur that day. Don't you plan to seize the opportunity today?" Chen Duoduo waved his hand and said, "I just saw Miss Shershur that day and couldn't help but compose a poem. There is no other meaning. Brother Chen is very talented. Your reputation has spread throughout Fengzhou. I admire you." A person cupped his hands and said, "We have known each other for more than 10 years, but I didn't know that Brother Chen had such a talent for poetry. Brother Chen, you have hidden it well." The people around him were all friends that he had known for a long time. They were not like those pedantic scholars who only knew how to mock him. Chen Duoduo smiled and said, "Don't be arrogant, don't be arrogant. I am very low-key." One of them revealed an indignant expression and said, "There are actually people who say that Brother Chen's poems were bought." Even Zhao Xiuwen acknowledged Brother Chen's works and admitted that it would be difficult for him to surpass them. In the state of Qi, is there anyone who is more talented than him? Could it be that Brother Chen bought a poem from Zhao Xiuwen? Yes, such a poem is probably a priceless treasure. How could it be bought with money? Another person agreed. Chen Duoduo shook his head and said in a low voice, "There is no such thing as a priceless treasure in this world. If 100 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. If 1,000 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. There has to be a price that matches it. I think that poem is only worth 1,000 taels of silver." Someone asked doubtfully, "Those poor people value their moral integrity more than their lives. Can this kind of poem be bought with money?" Chen Duoduo smiled and said, "There is nothing in this world that cannot be bought with money. If there is, it means that you did not pay enough." Someone asked in surprise, "Brother Chen, do you mean that you bought that poem?" "Of course not." Chen Duoduo shook his head and said, "I can easily write a dozen of those poems. Do I need to buy it?" Chapter 681. Brother Chen is talented. I admire you, admire you. The moment Chen Duoduo said this, the young men beside him were stunned for a moment before they immediately said with a smile. Almost all of their families were businessmen. Although they had been forced to study since they were young, it was difficult for them to even memorize books. They knew nothing about poems and essays. Because of this, they were looked down upon by those scholars. They naturally did not have a good impression of those people. They were happy to see Chen Duoduo write good poems and slap those people in the face. Of course, it was also because the Chen family was rich. Many of their families could only survive by relying on the Chen family. They had to fawn on the Chen family's young masters. My father often taught me to be low-key. I have talent. Will I tell you? Will I be like those poor bastards who spread it everywhere? I won't. Chen Duoduo stretched out his hand and pressed it down. He said, "It's fine if you know about these things. Don't spread it around. I don't like to be ostentatious. I don't know where he bought a poem from, but he's getting cocky." A cold snort came from the side. A green-robed scholar glanced over and said, "He really thinks he's a scholar. It's fine if he's trash who doesn't know anything about literature, but to take someone else's poem as his own, he's simply shameless." "Who are you talking about? Who are you talking about?" Before Chen Duoduo could speak, a person beside him stood up and turned around to look at him in dissatisfaction. The green-robed scholar smiled mockingly. He turned his head and said, "Who doesn't know shame? Who knows in their hearts? Don't you think so? If his heart is magnanimous, why would he be afraid of the words of others? I'm afraid some people have ulterior motives. Only he knows if there are any ulterior motives." There were a few other similarly dressed men beside the green-robed scholar. At this moment they all spoke, their tone full of mockery. Chen Duoduo stood up and walked over. He looked at the person from before and asked, "If his heart is magnanimous, he won't be afraid of the words of others?" The scholar nodded and said, "Of course." Chen Duoduo asked again, "Then are you magnanimous?" The man sneered and said, "We scholars have righteousness in our hearts. We do things in an upright manner. We are naturally magnanimous." "You aren't afraid of the words of others?" "Not really impotent." "No." As soon as the scholar opened his mouth, he realized that something was wrong. He swallowed the next word and looked at him coldly. "How could I fall for such a clumsy trick?" he said. "Since you don't care what others say?" Chen Duoduo looked at him and said, "If I call you a son of a bitch, won't you be angry?" The scholar was startled, his face quickly turned from red to green. Pointing at him he said, brat, you dare?" Chen Duoduo looked at him and said, "Look, you don't even know how to scold people. Who is the trash? You dare to say that you are not a wastrel who spent money to buy poems?" The scholar's eyes were almost spitting fire as he said, "If you can compose another poem of that level on the spot, I, Wanjun, will immediately kowtow to you and apologize for what I said before." "Brother Wan," the expressions of the few scholars behind him changed as they hurriedly stepped forward and said worriedly, "Brother Wan, be careful with your words. If Chen Duoduo bought 2 poems instead of 1, Wanjun would lose all his face from now on. He would never be able to raise his head in Feng State City again. You don't need to say anything more." Wanjun waved his hand and said, "If he can buy 2 poems of that level, I will admit defeat this time. If he can't, I will expose this shameless wastrel to the public." "Are you sure?" Chen Duoduo looked at him and said, "If I can compose another poem, will you kowtow to me?" A scholar added, "It is to compose another excellent poem that everyone will agree with. If you make up a few lines, will Brother Wan still kowtow to you?" The commotion here had already attracted the attention of the people in the hall. Even the woman on the stage temporarily stopped her performance and looked over with a surprised and doubtful expression. "If that's the case, then let's bet." Chen Duoduo nodded as he looked at the stage and said, "I remember the first time I met Miss Feifei. The plumage dance is still fresh in my memory. I will give this poem to Miss Feifei." "I give it to me?" The woman on the stage was startled and couldn't come back to her senses for a while. Below the stage there was already a voice coming out. "After a dream the tower is locked high, and the curtains are lowered when I sober up. Last year's spring hate comes. Falling flowers stand alone, and swallows fly together in the rain. I remember the first time I met Feifei wearing a robe with 2 hearts. The lute string speaks of yearning. The bright moon shines on the robe, and the rosy clouds return." The woman on the stage called Feifei was still wondering when she had worn a robe with 2 hearts. As for the lute, she didn't remember playing it often. She was good at the zither. Below the stage the young man called Wanjun was stunned on the spot. The expressions of the people behind him changed almost at the same time. They didn't expect Chen Duoduo to so easily throw out such a poem. The people around them were already whispering the lyrics, secretly comparing it to the previous song. They were both about singing girls and the style was similar. The lyrics were similar. A person's style was usually fixed. At the same time it was very difficult to change it. It was very easy for outsiders to tell if the two poems were written by the same person. Originally, they were almost certain that the Partridge Sky was bought by Chen Duo. However, at this moment their hearts were a little shaken. After all, there were no scholars who had reached this level of talent who would be willing to sell their hard work. In reality, when one's literary talent reached this level, they would not lack money. One poem was already a little unbelievable, let alone two? Chen Duo turned to look at Wan Jun and said, "How is it? This poem is not bad, right? What did Brother Wan say just now?" Wan Jun's expression changed. He couldn't tell which of the two poems was better. Because of personal preferences and other factors, no one could tell. Because of this, it meant that if Chen Duo made another poem that was similar to the previous one, he would have to kowtow to him and apologize. At this moment, someone behind Wan Jun suddenly said, "You bought one and you might have bought two. Unless you take out another one, you still can't prove that these two poems were written by you. I knew you would be shameless." Chen Duo shook his head and said, "Then how about you listen to this one?" After saying this, he opened his mouth again and said, "Red leaves, yellow flowers, autumn is late, 1,000 miles miss the traveler. Flying clouds end, returning to the swan with no letter, where can I send a letter? Tears fall unceasingly by the window. Like an inkstone turning to grind ink. Gradually writing about parting, deep in this love, the red paper is colorless." Wan Jun opened his mouth and his face was ashen. This time he didn't say anything. The scholars behind him also had faces full of disbelief. How long had it been? Did he really think composing poems was like eating and drinking? The way the surrounding people looked at Chen Duo had already changed. He might have bought one or two poems, but he couldn't possibly tie up a talented scholar to write poems for him, right? Anyone who was involved in poetry could easily see that these three poems were obviously written by the same person. Such a talented scholar should have been famous throughout Feng province. How could he work for someone else's disciple? Could it be that this young Master Chen, who had always been known as an idiot, had been hiding it all along? Astonished expressions appeared on more and more people's faces. Li was also astonished. Other than astonishment, he was also gratified. This was because when he came back, he found that Mississippi Lu had actually washed all the dishes. In the past 2 years, this was the first time he saw her do such a thing. After putting away the groceries and the money, he chatted with Mississippi Lu for a while before going to bed. Among the 13 poems just now, more than 8 of them were written by Yan Jidao. Before going to bed, Li put his palms together and recited in his heart, "I'm forced to make a living. Brother Yen, don't blame me, don't blame me." Chapter 682. Wan Jun's face was pale. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. The scholars behind him also lowered their heads and didn't say a word. Everyone, including the woman on the stage, looked at Chen Duo with unprecedented changes in their eyes. "Brother Wan, how is this poem? It's not bad, right?" Chen Duo looked at Wan Jun and said, "I don't know why, but my thoughts are flowing like a spring today. Just now I came across another poem. Brother Wan, do you want to help me appreciate it? You don't push me too far." Wan Jun raised his head and widened his eyes, which were full of anger. Chen Duo looked at him and narrowed his eyes, saying, "Brother Wan, have you forgotten what you just said?" "I was wrong." Wan Jun's expression changed. He said in a low voice and turned around saying, "Let's go." Seeing that they were about to leave, one of the people behind Chen Duo wanted to stop them but was stopped by him. Chen Duo waved his hand and said, "Forget about kowtowing. I don't want to have such an unfilial son." Many people looked at the backs of Wan Jun and the others as they left with complicated expressions. If Wan Jun really kowtowed and admitted his mistake tonight, he would lose all his face. After tomorrow he would definitely become the laughingstock of Feng State City. Although he temporarily saved his face by leaving like this, it was inevitable that he would end up going back on his word. If Chen Duo was just an idiot and the poem was really bought, it would be fine. But he threw out 2 more poems just like that and shut everyone's mouth. With that kind of talent, how could he sell his poems to others for money? Unless he really kidnapped Zhao Xiuwen and forced him to write poems for him. Otherwise, he had always been low-key and never revealed anything. However, if it was the latter, what was the reason? One person looked at Chen Duo with eyes full of admiration and said, "Hey brother Chen, you just said that you have a new poem. Read it for us." "Read what?" Loki. Chen Duo waved his hand and said, "We'll talk about it next time." Just now he had desperately memorized 2 poems. When he read the first one, he almost read out the 2 words Xiao Ping. If he hadn't remembered that there was an annotation below the sentence, where the word Xiaoping could be written with any woman's name, he would have almost made a fool of himself. He even marked out such details. That brother was really meticulous to the extreme. He could simply be called a businessman with a conscience. Let's go. Eating and drinking were not his goals. He had already done what he needed to do. Seeing those poor scholars suffer made him feel carefree. Chen Duoduo waved his hand and walked out of the door. Young Master Chen, please wait. Chen Duoduo turned his head in confusion and saw the woman named Fei Fei coming down. She smiled and said to him, I wonder if Fei Fei has the honor to invite Mr. Chen upstairs for a chat? Chen Duoduo was stunned and said, yes. Seeing the two of them walking up while talking and laughing, the people behind Chen Duoduo stood there in a daze. Brother Chen, you guys go back first. I want to talk about poetry with Miss Fei Fei. Chen Duoduo didn't look back. He waved his hand and said, it's good to know how to write poems. Seeing the two of them enter a certain room, someone sighed and said with a sigh. Before today, Chen Duoduo was still the same as them, relying on throwing money to attract the attention of these women. After today, he had completely left their ranks. Just like today, they could only sigh as they watched him and Miss Fei Fei's back. Very quickly, the woman on the stage changed to another person. However, she did not receive much attention from the crowd. It was unknown how many people were looking at the tightly shut door upstairs with complicated feelings. Li Yi pushed open the door and stretched comfortably. He let out a long breath of foul air and could not help but feel refreshed. The medicinal herbs must have really worked. These days, Mississippi Lu's body was recovering very quickly. Apart from being unable to use her vital qi, she was no different from a normal person in other aspects. At this rate, it would not be long before this trip to the Qi Kingdom came to a successful end. He had asked Lin Wanru before. The Lin family's caravan had no plans to go to the Jing Kingdom in the near future. Being in a foreign country, he could not find anyone he could trust to send a message. Thinking about it, the news that Rui and the others had received should only be the last time he and Mississippi Lu appeared in Shuzhou. The possibility of them finding this place was very small. He could not leave the injured Mississippi Lu here alone. There was no one he could use, so he could only put this matter aside for the time being. Li brothers, Miss wants to see you. Lin Yong's figure appeared at the door. Li waved his hand and said, got it? I'll go right away. These days he had been meeting with Miss Lin almost every day. After learning how to use the debit and credit method, she took out all the previous accounts and calculated them one by one. Sometimes, when she encountered a problem, she would ask him for help. When walking into Fonglin Garden, Li Yi's eyes inadvertently glanced around. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He looked at Lin Yong and asked, what about the horse stepping on swallows? It was sold. Hearing this, Lin Yong said somewhat gloomily, who sold it? Li looked at him and asked. Of course it was Mississippi. Lin Yong sighed and said, although it was sold for a total of 13,000 taels, which is a profit of 5,000 taels, I just don't like that by guy. If it wasn't for him pestering us all day, Miss would definitely not have sold it. These days, business has not been as good as before. Believe in your Mississippi. It's good to sell it. Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and walked to a room in the backyard of the shop. That by guy really loved this Miss Lin. He fought to prevent losses for the Lin family. He was the most suitable spare tire. He knocked on the door and a gentle voice came from inside. Is it Li? Come in. Lin Wanru was sitting at the table and writing something seriously. Li Yi walked over and shook his head after glancing at it. That guy surnamed Chen was really addicted to showing off. In just a few days he had written 13 poems. It was extremely ostentatious. Did he really want to be the poet sage of the Qi Kingdom? Seeing him shake his head, Lin Wanru put down the pen and said with a smile, it's not good. I'm sorry. Li shook his head and said, it's a lot better than before. I still have to thank you for your guidance. Lin Wanru stood up and said. She was very clear that her calligraphy could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was all because of his advice from time to time. The more she interacted with him, the more she found that this scholar who was picked up had many unexpected things. First was his amazing calligraphy. Second was his culinary skills. He seemed to know some martial arts too. Even some of the views on business that he revealed in a few words were also a great inspiration to her. This always made her suspicious. Could it be that every scholar in Jianghu was like this? Li Yi's gaze moved away from the poem she had copied and asked, is there something wrong with the accounts again? Lin Wanru shook her head and said, I actually invited you here because I have a presumptuous request. The concept of presumptuous request was too broad. Some things could be agreed to and some could not be agreed to. After all, Mississippi Lou was still here, so he still had to pay attention to some things. What is it? Lee looked at her and asked. He had to clarify whether he could agree to it or not. There's an important meeting tomorrow night. Several big trading companies in Feng State will be participating. Brother Lin is straightforward, so it's not suitable for him to participate. I don't know if you have time. I think, that's it? That's it. Lee nodded with some disappointment. If it's tomorrow night, I should have time. Chapter 683. The meeting that Lin Wanru mentioned was actually a gathering of some rich businessmen in Fengzhou City. It was said that it would be held every once in a while. After all, doing business was not the business of one or two families. Even top businessmen like the Chen family had to cooperate with others, let alone the Lin family, who could not avoid these necessary social interactions. As the guard of the Lin family, Lin Yong was also Lin Wanru's bodyguard most of the time. He would follow her on some important occasions. In the previous meeting, because a certain wealthy merchant said some inappropriate words to Lin Wanru, he was violently beaten up by the furious Lin Yong on the spot. Later on, the Lin family paid a price to settle the matter with great difficulty. Although there weren't any serious consequences, from then on, Lin Wanru didn't dare to bring him to similar occasions anymore. Lin Wanru had just briefly mentioned these things to him. Compared with Lin Yong, who was a hothead, he looked gentle and modest. He knew how to do business. Most importantly, he was handsome and could be taken out to meet people. He was the best choice to take his family on a trip to a banquet. The reason why he agreed to take her along was that they had become familiar with each other these days. It was not a good idea to refuse such a small matter. Secondly, it was boring to go to bed early every night. It was good to go out occasionally to change the mood. The place they were going to tomorrow was a small manor of the Chen family in the city. Every banquet was held by several top businessmen in turn. Small families like the Lin family were only qualified to participate. The host of this banquet was the Chen family. Recently, the Chen family was very famous in Fengzhou City. Before this, the Chen family was well known because they were rich. Recently, they became famous because they had an evildoer. This evildoer was called Chen Duo. More than a dozen shocking poems were thrown out, which made him completely popular in Fengzhou City. Everyone knew that Zhao Xiuwen was the sage of poetry of the Qi kingdom. He was a role model for scholars, and he was the top scholar in the 5th year of Xinghe. Now he was assisting the 3rd prince in Feng province. Everyone knew about his talent. However, in recent days, Chen Duoduo's name had almost overshadowed Zhao Xiuwen's reputation in Feng Prefecture City. After being ridiculed for more than 10 years, he had also been labeled as an idiot for more than 10 years. After enduring patiently for more than 10 years, he suddenly shocked everyone and completely subverted everyone's understanding of him. There were many people who had doubts about this, but there were also some people who believed that the Chen family had really produced a Qilin son this time. Xiuwen, what do you think? Yang Yinzhou asked Zhao Xiuwen after flipping through a book of poems. Great literary talent. Zhao Xiuwen also held a similar booklet in his hand. He nodded his head and said, 13 poems, each of which is an excellent work. Yang Yinzhou shook his head and asked, do you really believe that these poems were written by Chen Duo in 5 days? For a poem of this level, even I would have to spend a long time to craft it. It's not like you, and I don't know what the son of the god of wealth is like. Zhao Xiuwen put down the book of poems and said, there must be an expert behind him. But I still can't figure it out. From his poems, I can see that he must be a proud person. Why would he give away his painstaking efforts? Could it really be just for money? Yang Yinzhou asked doubtfully, the important thing is, when did such a talent appear in Feng province? Zhao Xiuwen smiled and said, I might have to go to the Chen family in a few days. Speaking of which, he is also in Feng province. Yang Yinzhou thought about it and said, could it be him? Zhao Xiuwen raised his eyebrows and asked, if it was him, it would not be difficult for him to write these poems. But why would he give them to a stranger? It's not a gift. Yang Yinzhou looked at him and said, when he first arrived in Feng province, he pawned the 3rd prince's jade pendant. He must be in desperate need of money. With his style of doing things, it is not strange at all that he would do such a thing. Zhao Xiuwen frowned and asked, even if he was in need of money, he is a proud scholar. How could he? Xiuwen, you still don't know him very well. Yang Yinzhou smiled and said, years ago in Qingyan Prefecture, he wrote the Immortal on the Magpie Bridge on the prayer lantern. It was picked up by someone and spread out. At the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, he used the Shuadiao Getu to win 200 taels of silver. At King Ning's mansion he used the phrase writing new poems to express his worries, and made many scholars lose face. A dozen poems caused the reputation of the goddess of water to spread to the Qi kingdom. But what you don't know, Xiuwen, is that he casually gave those poems to a woman. Now that I think about it, when he was in need of money, it is not strange that he used these poems to exchange for money. Yang Yanzhou smiled bitterly and said, even though I don't want to admit it to him, poems seem to be something that he did casually. Which scholar doesn't view their proud works as treasures? But he didn't care at all. Just this point alone is something that I will not be able to do in my lifetime. If it really was him, Zhao Xiuwen looked out the window and said, I have to go to the Chen family today. In a gorgeous manner somewhere in Fengzhou City, a fat middle-aged man with a big belly walked out of the door. He looked at the two young men and said with a bit of surprise, what kind of wind is blowing today? How come you two are here? Zhao Xiuwen cupped his hands and said, I took the liberty to come here. Money God, please don't be offended. The fat middle-aged man waved his hand and said, don't be offended. Please come in quickly. Perhaps not many people knew the name of this middle-aged fatty, but if one mentioned his nickname, almost everyone in Feng State City would know about it. Money God, the master of the Chen family, started from scratch. In just a short period of more than 10 years, he had accumulated countless family wealth. People only knew that the Chen family was very rich, but they didn't know how much money they had. Therefore they simply called him Money God, which showed the wealth of the Chen family. In a spacious hall in the manor, the three of them sat as guests and hosts. Money God took a sip of tea and looked at the two people and asked, did the third prince make any arrangements for you two to come here this time? Yang Yanzhou shook his head and said, the third prince did not make any arrangements. What are you doing here if he didn't make any arrangements? Money God was startled. He stood up and said, I am very busy here. In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea with you, a few hundred taels of silver are gone. Zhao Xiuwen stood up and said, Money God, if you have something to do, go do it. This time we are here to find your son. Money God's face showed vigilance and he asked, why are you looking for Duo? Did he get into trouble outside again? It's not that he got into trouble. Zhao Xiuwen looked at him and said, there is something that I want young Master Chen to clarify. Money God's face became more vigilant and he said, you two are good enough to be my Master Duoduo's teachers. What kind of thing can you need my Master Duo to clarify? Zhao Xiuwen's face showed helplessness. He turned his head and looked at Yang Yanzhou and said, Yanzhou, you tell him. There are 10,000 taels of silver here, enough to buy 13 songs. Next time you can't be so impulsive. Release one song every 3 days. Well, that's it. In a room, a slightly fat young man pressed a stack of silver notes under his pillow and whispered, I have to save money for a while. I can't let father know. Young master, young master. A servant's voice came from outside the door. Chen Duo put down the quilt, walked over, opened the door and asked, what's the matter? The servant immediately said, young master, the master wants you to go over. Chen Duo frowned and asked, isn't my father busy at night now? What does he want me to do? The servant replied, I don't know. There were 2 guests at home just now, so the master came over and asked me to call you over. Chen Duo waved his hand and said, lead the way. He was thinking about how to see his brother again. Under the guidance of the servant, he soon came to a hall. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man sitting in the chair and asked, Father, why are you looking for me? Chen Duo looked at him with a black face and asked, tell me, what have you done in the past few days? Tell me honestly. No. Chen Duo was stunned for a moment and said, I've been fine these days. I haven't caused any trouble. Bastard, you still don't admit it? Chen Duo stood up from the chair, pointed at his nose and scolded, I haven't paid attention to you for a few days. You've grown up. Instead of learning how to do business with me, you actually went to write poems. Why did you write such useless things? Don't tell me that you want to be the top scorer. Instead of doing proper things, you have to go to these crooked ways. Even if you become the top scorer, what can you do? You're still a good for nothing. On the side, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen looked at each other and took a deep breath at the same time. The two extremely self-restrained top scorers finally calmed down a little. Chapter 684. Dad, I know I was wrong. Chen Duo lowered his head and said sincerely. When it came to this kind of topic, he never argued with his father. Otherwise, it would cause even more serious consequences. You have to remember that you will inherit the Chen family in the future. Don't go down the wrong path. Chen Duo nodded with satisfaction. Then he turned his head and looked at Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen. He said, "Okay, Tu Zhuangyuan, if you have anything to say you can ask now." When he called them Zhuangyuan, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen didn't have any special feelings in their hearts. At this moment, when he mentioned it again, they felt an inexplicable irony. Suppressing this strange thought, Yang Yanzhou looked at Chen Duo and said, "I just want to ask young Master Chen, the 14 poems that have been circulating recently, were they written by you?" As his voice fell, Zhao Xiuwen also looked over. "What do you mean?" Chen Duo frowned and said, "My poems of course were written by me. This is not a business. Can I buy them from others?" Zhao Xiuwen glanced at him and said, "This is a matter of great importance. I hope young Master Chen can answer truthfully." Chen Duo curled his lips and said, "What do you mean truthfully? This was originally written by me." Zhao Xiuwen cupped his hands and said, "Since young Master Chen can write such excellent works, you must have a lot of works in your daily life. Brother Yang and I are also people who love poetry. Young Master Chen, why don't you take it out and let us appreciate your literary talent?" Damn, I was careless. Chen Duo cursed in his heart. At that time, he should have spent another 10,000 taels of silver to buy 100 poems that were worth 100 taels of silver. If he was unhappy he could have spent one, and if he was happy he could have spent two. Then he wouldn't have encountered this embarrassing situation. Ahem. He covered his mouth and coughed dryly. He said, "Writing poetry relies on inspiration. To be honest, I haven't written before. Suddenly, one day when I woke up, there was a strange feeling in my mind. I felt like my thoughts were flowing and my writing was spirited." Chen Duo sighed and said, "This feeling will appear every few days. I don't know when it will appear again." Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou were stunned for a moment. Although some masterpieces relied on a momentary flash of inspiration, the prerequisite was that one had to accumulate enough experience to support such momentary inspiration. He was originally an idiot and suddenly wrote so many terrifying poems. That flash of inspiration had to be flashing from morning to night. Zhao Xiuwen looked back at Fortune God of Money and asked, "Fortune God of Money?" Money God of Fortune waved his hand and said, "Whether you believe it or not, I believe it." Yang Yanzhou suddenly turned his head to look at him and said, "This matter is related to an important matter for His Highness. We must know who wrote this poem." "Really?" Fortune God of Money's face froze. "Of course," Yang Yanzhou said. Money God of Fortune nodded, turned to Chen Duo and asked, "Tell me who bought those poems from?" Seeing the God of Fortune's serious face, Chen Duo showed a hint of hesitation on his face. How much did it cost?" Chen Duo looked up again and said helplessly, 10,000 taels. 10,000 taels and you bought a few lousy poems? Money God of Money's eyes widened. "You prodigal son of AB***. Money God of Money, many of those poems are enough to be passed down through the ages. They are worth far more than 10,000 taels. Zhao Xiuwen finally couldn't help but speak. Money God of Money waved his hand and said, "I don't care if it's passed down or not. Throwing out 10,000 taels of silver without making a sound is not the style of my Chen family." Then he looked at Chen Duo and said angrily, "Tell me honestly, who sold these poems to you?" Chen Duo sighed and said helplessly, I don't know. You said you didn't even see the person's face, let alone know who he is. You just gave him 10,000 taels of silver. Aren't you afraid that he will cheat you?" Money God of Money rubbed his eyebrows and asked again. Chen Duo said, "But it turns out that the brother did not cheat me. ****, you're still in the right." Money God of Money was so angry that the fat on his face trembled a few times. At this time, an old servant walked in from outside the door and said, "Master, the Zhou family and the Huang family are here. I'll deal with you when I'm done tonight." The Zhou family and the Huang family both had major cooperation with the Chen family. Their families' financial resources were similar to the Chen family's, so they could not be neglected. Money God of Money glared at Chen Duo and said to Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen, "I have important guests to entertain now. You guys sit here for a while." Zhao Xiuwen nodded and said, "Money God of Money, go ahead. We still have some details to ask young Master Chen." Seeing Money God of Money leave, Chen Duo obviously relaxed. He sat on the chair next to him, shrugged at the two of them and said, "I just told you everything I know. There's nothing more. I don't know how to contact him. It's useless to ask me." A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He asked, "You just said that the person who sold you the poems was called Li Han?" Chen Duo took a sip of tea, nodded and said, yes, he said that he would not change his name or his surname. It should not be false. Prince Jin Li Han. Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, it should not be false. A trace of joy appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He looked at Chen Duo and said, describe the situation again. Chen Duo's face showed an impatient expression. He waved his hand and said, how many times have I said that I really don't know where he is? I have already told you what I should tell you. You can go and find him. Why are you staying at my house? Li Yi once heard people say that among the many mansions in Fengzhou City, the one with a silver lion at the door was the Chen family. At that time he thought that it was not symmetrical. He imagined the image of a silver lion squatting in front of the Chen family's door. He felt awkward for a while. When he arrived at the Chen family, he found that there was not one lion but two. If he had known that there would be such a thing, he would not have sold his poems. With this lion he could have anything he wanted. He looked back at Lin Wanru and asked, is this lion really made of pure silver? Everyone in Fengzhou City knows about the Chen family's silver lion. Lin Wanru nodded and said, let's go in. The Chen family was indeed the Chen family. Even the gate was higher than the two next to it. There were a lot of servants at the door to greet the guests. After handing over the invitation, they were welcomed in. Lin Wanru obviously had some connections in Fengzhou. Along the way, many people greeted them with a smile, especially some young men. Their tone and expressions were even more attentive. There were quite a number of young people here today, and they were not like what Li Yi had imagined, a group of middle-aged, balding, successful people. Of course, there were also some people who came with their elders. In this kind of occasion, it was beneficial to accumulate more connections. Wanru, over here. A voice came from not far away. Li Yi turned his head and saw young Master Bai walking over with a smile on his face. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. He looked at Li Yi and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He asked suspiciously, why is he here? Brother Bai. Lin Wanru nodded at him and said, I invited Li to come with me. Excuse me. She bowed slightly and turned back to smile at Li Yi. She said, let's go over there. The young man with the surname Bai stood in the same place and looked back. When he saw the two disappearing figures, his expression began to change. Brother Bai, who was the person beside Miss Wanru just now? I don't think I've seen him before. A young man walked over from the side with a puzzled expression. Bai Yu smiled and said, I don't know. I'm not familiar with him. He should be someone from the Lin family. The man smiled and patted his shoulder. It's been so long, but you still haven't won Miss Lin's heart. Brother Bai, you have to work hard. Bai Yu smiled and didn't say anything. However, when the man turned around and left, a trace of darkness quickly appeared on his face. Chapter 685. Sitting in a remote corner, Li Yi could feel young Master Bai's resentment towards him from a distance of 30 feet away. After thinking about it carefully, he seemed to understand something. Before, he had thought that although he was a hero, it was necessary for him to attend banquets, but with Lin Wanru's temperament, how could she ask for a man? However, if she was just looking for a shield, everything would make sense. Li Yi looked at her, but Lin Wanru didn't look at him. She quickly looked away. She took out a small booklet from her sleeve and said, there is one thing I don't quite understand about the bookkeeping method. It was obvious that she was changing the topic. She was so smart, so how could she not understand the simple bookkeeping method after such a long time? She saw through it, but she didn't point it out. Otherwise both of them would be embarrassed. Li Yi nodded and said, what do you not understand? Let me see. Not far away beside a table, the young man with the surname Bai looked somewhere and clenched his fists tightly. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. Seeing two people coming over, he smiled and stood up to greet them. Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su, long time no see. Hey, isn't this young Master Bai? Long time no see, long time no see. Well, you go ahead. I will sit here for a while and eat something. Li Yi waved his hand and Lin Wanru, who was absent-minded, came back to herself. She nodded and said, then I will go first. Watching her leave, Li Yi took a piece of fresh fruit and vegetables from the table. The Qian family prepared enough drinks and snacks and they tasted good. Except for Lin Wanru, he didn't know anyone else here. Tonight, the people in the manor were all in small groups. Those who had business dealings with each other naturally gathered together. There were several places where there were many people, and they surrounded one or two people in the innermost area with smiles on their faces. Those people should be the famous businessmen in Fengzhou City. Feeling bored, Zhang Xian casually swept his gaze across the area and saw a familiar fatty walking out from a door. There were two other people beside the fat man. They were both handsome and elegant young men. Li was about to put a piece of preserved fruit into his mouth when his wrist stopped in mid-air. "Why are they here?" he murmured with a surprised expression. He was surprised to see Zhao Xiuwen there. After all, although he was also in Fengzhou, it was unlikely that he would appear on such an occasion. But the person beside him seemed to be the former top scholar of Qing and Yang Yanzhou. He and Yang Yanzhou had met twice before. Although they weren't familiar with each other, he shouldn't have mistaken him for someone else. Reaching out to touch his face, he felt at ease. Anything could happen in Jianghu. It was very important to open a SMUF account. Otherwise, he would be recognized today. As the two of them walked out, the surroundings immediately became restless. Is that young Master Zhao and young Master Yang? Why are they here? Young Master Zhao and young Master Yang are His Highness's right-hand men. Fortune God Chen and them seem to be very familiar. Why do you think the Chen family has been so successful in Fengzhou for so many years? If they didn't have the third prince's support? Hearing the quiet discussions of the crowd, Li Yi's expression froze. He then lowered his head and rubbed the space between his brows. There was too much information. He needed to process it all. Yang Yanzhou, Zhao Xiuwen, Fortune God Chen, they were all the third prince's men of the Qi kingdom. Fengzhou was the territory of the third prince, Zhao Yi. His manor was in Fengzhou city. Did this mean that he had been in front of the third prince of the Qi kingdom all this time? Back when he was still in the capital, the third prince had specially paid him a visit. He gave him a jade pendant and said something sincere. He probably meant that if he couldn't survive in the Jing kingdom, he could go to the Qi kingdom and rely on him. The two of them would hold hands and do something spectacular. But for now, Li didn't have such a plan. If he had directly revealed his identity, his current situation would naturally be much better. But he was afraid that in the future he would be under the control of others in everything he did. The day when he could return to the Jing kingdom was even more distant. If he had known that he would meet them here, he wouldn't have come out. The current situation was still passable. Based on Mississippi Lu's recovery speed, they would probably be able to set off for home in another 2 or 3 months. Before that, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Speaking of which, the jade pendant that Zhao Yi gave him was lost. It seemed that it was taken by Mississippi Lu on that day and he hadn't seen it since. As if he had thought of something, Li Yi's face revealed a startled expression. Not long after he sighed. He was afraid that he would not be able to redeem the jade pendant that he had borrowed from Miss Lu. Even the pawnshop from before could not be used again. Fortunately, he was wearing a bamboo hat at that time and the shopkeeper did not see his face. Otherwise he would be in trouble now. What's wrong? Lin Wanru walked over and asked when she saw that he didn't look right. Li Yi pointed and said, "Those two people over there." Lin Wanru looked over and said, "You mean Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou? They are very famous in Feng province. Zhao Xiuwen is even known as the role model of scholars. He is well known in the entire Qi kingdom. It's normal for these people to surround them." Li Yi looked at her and asked with some uncertainty, "Is the third prince of the Qi kingdom also in Feng province?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "Feng province is the third prince's fief. King Feng's mansion is in Feng province." After confirming everything from Lin Wanru, Li Yi looked in that direction and watched Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou leave surrounded by people. Then he withdrew his gaze. Seeing that Lin Wanru was also looking in that direction, he asked curiously, "Don't you like Zhao Xiuwen? Why don't you go over?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I just admire his literary talent. I don't like him." Seeing that she seemed to be a little annoyed, Li Yi said, "What did you talk about just now? What's wrong? Did it not work out?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I don't know why, but the Ma family and the Su family increased the price of raw materials by 10%. In Feng province, apart from these two families, only the Bai family can provide raw materials to make jewelry. Fragrant Forest Garden has always been working with these 3 families. If we don't want to lose our profits, we can only choose the Bai family. However, it is very likely that the Bai family is behind this. After they achieve this goal, they will definitely have other tricks up their sleeves. If we put all our hopes on the Bai family, we will definitely be led by the nose in the future." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "At present there is still a lot of stock in the shop. And support us for a while. We will think of a way when the time comes." Li Yi could not help her with this matter. He still had a lot of things to solve. Feng province, the third prince, things in this world were really coincidental. the so-called meeting was extremely boring. The only thing he gained was some information that was very important to him. Lin Wanru took out the booklet again and picked up a pen from the table. She seemed to be calculating something. After a while, she flipped through the booklet, stood up and looked around. What's wrong? Did you lose something? Li looked at her and asked. The piece of paper you just used to demonstrate. Lin Wanru said. She saw a fat man not far away pick up an item from the ground and said, I found it. It's over there. When she was about to walk over, a hand reached out from the side and held her wrist. Sit down. Li looked over and said in a low voice. Not far away, the fat middle-aged man was holding a piece of paper in his hand and looking at it carefully. Chapter 686. Regular gatherings of this nature were not just for a chat or a meal. The people present were businessmen of all sizes. If they got along well with each other and had the same opinion, it was very likely that a partnership could be finalized on the spot. Some of the decisions made by the top businessmen could even affect the economic direction of the entire Feng province in the future. This was the main purpose of this kind of banquet. Therefore, there were pens and paper everywhere in the manor. From time to time, people could be seen writing and calculating, discussing the distribution of profits and so on. It was unknown whether everyone was like Lin Wanru, who had the habit of carrying a small notebook with her. Not only did it have the function of a memo, but it could also record ideas and inspirations at any time. Lin Yong had once said that many of the jewelry styles in Fanglin Park were personally designed by her. Not only that, but she could also take out a small notebook and pretend to ask questions to cover up her embarrassment. However, the piece of paper that had just fallen out was not a jewelry style, nor was it a memo. It was a classic model of the debit and credit bookkeeping method that he had listed. What's wrong? Lin Wanru looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully. Just sit there and don't move. Li Yi threw a small piece of watermelon into his mouth and glanced in the direction of the fat man. Lin Wanru whispered, that is the master of the Chen family. People call him the god of wealth. As soon as she finished speaking, the fat middle-aged man put the piece of paper in his sleeve and looked around. After a long time, he turned around and walked to a brighter place in the house. According to the usual practice, every meeting would last more than 2 hours. Most of the time, people would communicate in groups of 3 to 5. At the end of the meeting, some big businessmen with status would routinely say a few words and so on. Some people left in high spirits, while others returned disappointed. Every meeting would change the economic structure of Feng province in the future, big or small. Just now. Why didn't you let me go? At the entrance of Fanglin Park, Lin Wanru, who had been silent all the way, finally asked the question in her heart. Li looked at her and asked, you haven't told anyone about that method, right? No. Lin Wanru shook her head. That's good. Li Yi knocked on the courtyard door, turned around and said, forget about this matter and don't let anyone know that you know that method, at least not now. The confusion on Lin Wanru's face deepened. Just as she was about to ask again, the courtyard door opened from the inside. See you tomorrow. Li Yi waved at her, turned around and walked in. Lin Wanru stood rooted to the ground for a long time before she shook her head and decided not to think about this matter for the time being. She turned around and said to the Lin family guards, let's go back as well. Why did you come back so late? Mississippi Lu covered her mouth and her voice was full of tiredness. That fatty took too long. Li Yi handed her a bag of things and said, that store's preserved fruit is quite delicious. Try it. It's too late. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Mississippi Lu took the paper bag, opened it, put a piece of dried fruit in her mouth and turned to walk into the house. Li Yi looked down and found that her ankles were bare. He shook his head and said, the ground is dirty. Next time you come out, remember to wear shoes. He walked into the house. The light in the room was on, but it was soon extinguished. In the Chen family, under the bright lights, the fat face of the Chen god of fortune was full of spirit. Good stuff, good stuff. He patted his thigh and couldn't help but exclaim. Chen Duo came over and asked, Dad, what's the good stuff? The Chen god of fortune waved his hand and said, Go to the accounting room and bring me last month's account book. Chen Duo asked doubtfully, Dad, what do you want the account book for? Go. The Chen god of fortune said impatiently. Chen Duo immediately stood up and trotted outside. Not long after, he carried a stack of accounts and walked in, huffing and puffing. Put it here. The Chen god of fortune pointed to the table next to him and moved the lamp to his side. Chen Duo moved a chair and sat down opposite him, looking at him with puzzled and curious eyes. The Qian god of fortune took the pen and ink, spread out a piece of paper, opened 2 account books, and recorded something on the paper from time to time. Qian Duo looked at the opposite side with his hands supporting his chin. He only saw the pages turning and the lights flickering. After a while his eyelids became heavy. Clatter. The sky was bright. Qian Duo rubbed his head, got up from the ground, straightened the chair, and finally wiped the remaining saliva from the corner of his mouth. When he looked up he was surprised and said, "Dad, you didn't sleep last night?" As his voice fell, the Qian god of fortune put down the pen, raised his arm, stretched his waist and sighed, "I'm old. It's only one night and my body can't stand it anymore." Qian Duo hurried over and gently beat his shoulder. "Good stuff." The Qian god of fortune picked up a piece of paper from the table and said, "Qian datong jing xian ma wei? Duo, tell them to call these managers for me." Qian Duo nodded and said, "Okay Dad, you go and rest for a while. I'll go right away." The Qian god of fortune rubbed his eyebrows, but he did not rest. He picked up another piece of paper, touched the short beard on his chin and wrote on it. After a while Qian Duo came in from outside and said, "Dad, they're here." The Qian god of fortune waved his hand and said, "Okay, you go out first." Qian Duo looked at him with some doubts. When he left he closed the door. A middle-aged man in the middle of the 3 said with a smile, "I don't know why the shopkeeper is looking for us." The Qian god of fortune glanced at them and asked faintly, "Datong, how long have the 3 of you been with me?" In reply to the shopkeeper, 5 years. A trace of doubt appeared on the middle-aged man's face and then he said. The 2 people looked at each other and a trace of joy quickly appeared on their faces. The shopkeeper rarely asked these questions. Did he want to promote the old people of the Chamber of Commerce? 5 years. The Qian god of fortune sighed and said, "In 5 years even a dog knows how to wag its tail. How can I raise you 3 ungrateful wolves?" When he said this he stood up from the chair, and the momentum of his whole body suddenly changed. The bodies of the 3 people trembled. When they looked up they seemed to see a mountain pressing down from the front. In the early morning, Li opened the door. The street was already full of pedestrians, and the Fonglin Yuan next to it had already opened. He came back very late yesterday and he was tossed around by Mississippi Lu until late at night, saying that he woke her up and that she wanted to listen to some martial arts story. Li covered his mouth and yawned. When he was about to turn around and go back he saw Lin Wanru coming from a distance. "Good morning, Miss Lin." Li waved to her from a distance. Last night he didn't explain too much to her. The power of debit and credit was more powerful than the power of heaven's punishment. If it was not handled properly people might die. Without enough strength it was better not to get involved. This matter had already been confirmed in the Jing kingdom. "Morning." Lin Wanru nodded slightly to him, walked past him and walked into the shop. When he shook his head and planned to go back to prepare breakfast for Mississippi Lu, who had not yet gotten up, Lin Yong's loud voice came from the shop next to him. "Go go go. What Great Britain and Little Britain? If you want to eat go somewhere else. Don't disturb our business." Li's footsteps stopped. Chapter 687. Did you hear that? Go go. In the shop in Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong waved his hand impatiently at the beggars in front of him and said, "It's not time to eat yet. There's no extra food here for you." Lin Wanru walked in from outside and happened to see Lin Yong driving away the beggars. She thought for a moment and said, "Brother Lin, go buy a few steamed buns for them and let them go." Lin Yong took out a dozen copper coins from his waist and slapped them on the table in front of him. He said, take it. Don't make trouble here." "We're not here to make trouble here." The leader, a man with unkempt hair and a dirty face, stammered, "We want to do business with you." Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves and said, "I've given you the money. Go quickly. Don't make trouble here. If you don't leave, don't blame me for being rude." "Brother Lin, I'll leave it to you," Lin Wanru said and walked toward the backyard. When she came in just now she seemed to have heard a familiar word from Lin Yong, but it just flashed in her mind and disappeared. She couldn't remember it no matter how hard she tried. She shook her head and stopped thinking about it. The Ma family and the Su family had cut off the source of raw materials for Fonglin Garden. This matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise the Lin family stock would not last long. "We're from Great Britain." Seeing that the beggar still dared to talk nonsense, Lin Yong finally showed a hint of anger on his face. When he was about to raise his head and roll up his sleeves, a voice came from outside the door. "You're from Great Britain?" Li walked in from outside the door and looked at the unkempt men. he asked. The United Kingdom of Northern Ireland? How did you? The man in the lead looked shocked and almost blurted out. He suddenly changed his words halfway and said, How do you know our country? Li asked with a smile, How is Queen Elizabeth? The men trembled slightly, and the way they looked at him immediately changed. Lin Yong scratched his head, walked over and asked, Li brothers, what are you talking about? Is there really something big? Great Britain? What does the Queen mean? Can a woman be a king? How come I've never heard of it? You'll know if you read more books. Li nodded. In their country, a woman can be the emperor. There's such a thing in the world? Lin Yong's face was full of shock. It was obvious that his worldview had been turned upside down. He asked, Then can their empress have many husbands? Can she handle it alone? Lin Yong's focus was always so unique. Li shook his head and said, It's not mentioned in the book. I've only seen descriptions of Great Britain in books before. This is the first time I've met them. I have to find a place to understand the customs of Great Britain. As for whether their queen can handle it, I'll help you ask later. Li looked at them and said, Guys, do you want to go next door and sit down? The man with unkempt hair and dirty face proudly said, You will certainly fall for the glory of the rising sun city. Watching them go out, Lin Yong seemed to think of something. He ran to the door and shouted, Li brothers, don't forget to ask for me. Got it? Li waved his hand to him and closed the courtyard door. Who are you? The moment he closed the courtyard door, the men immediately raised their heads and looked at him vigilantly. The man in the lead said in a deep voice, How do you know Elizabeth? All right, are you tired of talking like this? Li waved his hand. He stretched one hand to his ear, and a thin layer of something was torn off his face. The man in the lead was stunned, and his face instantly showed surprise. He asked, Young master, why are you here? Who are they? Mississippi Lu came out of the house and looked at the several people in the courtyard. She held autumn water in her hand. This subordinate greets the Union Lord. Several members of the Lu alliance saw her and immediately bowed. Their voices were loud and resounded throughout the courtyard. Li brothers, what's the situation inside? What are their names? Lin Yong's voice came from outside. Li replied loudly, It's nothing. They said that their queen also has 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines, similar to our emperor here. 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. Lin Yong touched his chin and thought of the picture of many women entangled together. He couldn't help but lick his lips. Suddenly, as if he remembered something, he looked up and asked, 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines, are they men or women? Men. A voice soon came from the courtyard. Men. Lin Yong touched his chin again. The next moment, his body trembled and his face suddenly turned pale. Don't you have a few hundred taels of silver in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea? Why do you have time to come here today? In King Feng's residence, Zhao Yi looked at a fat man and asked with a smile. Silver is important, but how can it compare to your highness's important matter? Money God of Wealth stood up from his chair and said, This time I came to show something to your highness. Could it be another rare treasure? Zhao Yi looked at him and smiled. If that's the case, Yanzhou Xiuan, you two come over too. Let's see what kind of rare thing Money God of Wealth has this time. Money God of Wealth shook his head and took out an item from his sleeve. He handed it to Zhao Yi and said, Your Highness, this is it. Zhao Yi opened the box and saw that there was only a piece of paper inside. He picked it up in confusion and looked at it. He shook his head and said, Don't keep me in suspense. Could it be that this piece of paper is a treasure? Money God of Wealth nodded and said, This piece of paper is indeed a treasure. At this time, Zhao Yi also became interested. He looked at him and said, Since it is a treasure, tell me what is its use? Money God of Wealth said slowly, Its use is to make Qi Kingdom free of corruption, and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean. After being stunned for a while, Zhao Yi looked at him with a strange light in his eyes and asked word by word, Is this true? Money God of Wealth nodded and said, Yes. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, Yanzhou Xiuan, come over and have a look. Although Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuan were both well-known talents in Qi Kingdom, they also realized the importance of this piece of paper after Money God of Wealth's explanation. When it came to things like accounts, businessmen were more sensitive. Money God of Wealth is worthy of being called Money God of Wealth. Yang Yanzhou saluted him and said, If this method can be implemented, Money God of Wealth will take the lead. Is there really such a strange thing? It can make Qi Kingdom free of corruption, and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean. As a voice came from outside the door, several figures came in from outside. The one walking in front was a young man in luxurious clothes. At this moment he was looking at them with sharp eyes. His Royal Highness Prince Heng. First Prince. Money God of Wealth's face showed doubt, while Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen's expressions changed slightly. I didn't know that you were coming. Zhao Yi didn't go out to meet you. I hope you don't take offense, Zhao Yi said slowly with a smile on his face. It's okay. The young man in luxurious clothes waved his hand and turned back to look at Money God of Wealth. He asked again, what you said just now, is it true? With just this piece of paper, you can completely wipe out the corrupt officials and restore Daqi to a clean country? Money God of Wealth glanced at Zhao Yi out of the corner of his eye. After a moment he nodded slightly. After temporarily sending away the foreign businessmen, when Li Yi walked back, Lin Wanru walked out of the shop. She still hadn't let go of something in her heart. She looked at him and asked, if the method of checking accounts is known, what will happen? Actually, it's nothing. Li Yi looked at her and said, at most, the situation will be unstable, the whole country will be in turmoil, heads will fall, and blood will flow like a river. Chapter 688. I failed to stop the first prince and ruined your highness's plan. Please punish me, your highness. In a hall of the prince's mansion, more than 10 guards of King Feng's mansion knelt in a row. They looked extremely remorseful. The third prince, Zhao Yi, waved his hand and said, get up. If my brother wants to force his way in, you can't stop him. Fortune God of Chen walked forward and said, your highness, although the first prince took that piece of paper, what was recorded on it was very simple. Ordinary people couldn't understand it at all. I can write a more detailed version now. That's not the most important thing. Zhao Yi looked out of the window and pondered. After a while he said, even if this method is effective in punishing corrupt officials, we can't be too hasty. We have to do it step by step and plan slowly. Otherwise, I'm afraid the disadvantages will outweigh the advantages. More than half of the imperial court will be involved. At that time, the situation will be out of control. Fortune God of Chen looked puzzled. Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen nodded slightly. Corrupt officials had existed since ancient times, and there was no end to them. There was no end to them. Even though the Qi Kingdom was powerful, there were many corrupt officials regardless of whether it was the central government or the officials of the various regions. If they were to carry out a drastic reform, it would definitely implicate countless people. It was unknown how many people would lose their lives. This would cause the people to panic and the political situation to become unstable. This was not their goal. This method could only be used gently. If it was done too hastily, there would be extremely serious consequences. But the first prince has always been eager for quick success and benefits. This time he won't let it go easily. Those censors are also stubborn. This time he left the capital to supervise the various prefectures. With this method, he will be like a tiger that has grown wings. Zhao Xiuwen paced in the hall and said slowly, he has always seen Feng province as a thorn in his side. This time he has bad intentions. He will definitely start with Feng province. Your Highness, you must be careful. Zhao Yi rubbed his right thumb and index finger gently. After a while he turned to look at Yang Yanzhou and said, Yanzhou, what do you think? Yang Yanzhou thought for a while and said, this is a rare opportunity for the first prince. Isn't it the same for us? He raised his head and said again, the first prince has always been eager for success. This time he will definitely make things difficult for your highness. Feng province has nowhere to hide, and the neighboring prefectures will also be affected. Your highness, why don't you push the boat with the current and thoroughly investigate Feng province? First, you can find the parasites. Second, you can eliminate the people they have planted in Feng province all these years. This way the two parties can supervise each other. No one can play. If the prince wants to investigate, you can. If the first wants to investigate, you will Feng province and prince. If prince wants, you can only Feng province. The god of wealth Chen scratched his head, and the confusion on his face grew. Finally he couldn't help but ask, why do we have to ask for the first prince's credit? What good will it do for us? What will happen after we ask for the credit? Zhao Xiuwen said, after we ask for the credit, His Majesty will certainly praise the first prince. Everyone in the court knows that the first prince has a powerful weapon in his hands. He can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. Maybe the prefectures that have been investigated before will be investigated again. Wherever the first prince goes, the officials will panic and the people will line the streets to welcome him. The god of wealth Qian looked at Zhao Xiuwen and then at Yang Yanzhou. He secretly swallowed his saliva. Wouldn't this make the first prince offend all the officials of the Qi kingdom? When he looked at the two again, his gaze had changed greatly. It seemed that not letting Duo take the top scholars exam was the right thing to do. He decided that in the future he must keep his son away from these sinister scholars. Compared with them, what was the deception in the business world? By the way, where did you get this thing? Zhao Yi suddenly looked at the god of wealth Qian and asked. The god of wealth Qian was startled and said, I picked it up. In a certain post house in Fengzhou City, a few imperial censors were sitting around a table. They had been staring at a piece of paper for almost half an hour. Do you understand it? The young man in luxurious clothes asked as he walked in with his hands behind his back. One of the censors lowered his head and said, Your Highness, the things recorded on this piece of paper are messy and unorganized. I really can't understand it. The young man in luxurious clothes frowned and asked, No one understands it? All of these censors were knowledgeable and talented, but they couldn't even compare to one of Zhao Yi's subordinates. This made him slightly angry. He thought for a moment and said, Go and find out who the fat man in King Feng's mansion is. The god of wealth Qian walked out of King Feng's mansion with a gloomy face. The treasure that he wanted to present to the third prince had been taken away halfway. He was naturally depressed. However, this person who came out of nowhere was someone that even the third prince could not afford to offend. He could only swallow his anger. Are you the god of wealth Qian? When he was about to reach the gate of the Qian mansion, two people suddenly flashed out from the side. The god of wealth Qian was startled. Seeing the cold faces of the two people, he looked at them in confusion and said, Who are you? Why are you looking for my brother? The two people were stunned and asked, The god of wealth Qian is your brother? Yes. The god of wealth Qian nodded and asked, Why are you looking for my brother? I'll go in and help you call him out. After that, he walked toward the gate of the mansion. He had just taken 2 steps when another figure walked out from the side. He could clearly see that this person was the one who had been following the first prince. The person looked at him and said lightly, The first prince wants to see you. Come with me. The god of wealth Qian's expression changed and said, Why is the first prince looking for me? The person waved his hand. You'll know when you get there. Are you the god of wealth Qian? The well-dressed young man looked at the fat man in front of him and asked with a smile. The god of wealth Qian immediately bowed and said, I don't deserve to be called the god of wealth Qian Duo. Greetings, your highness. I wonder why you summoned me here. The first prince picked up the piece of paper and said, Did you really create such a wonderful method? The god of wealth Qian looked up and said, It's just some petty cleverness. It's not elegant. Your highness, you flatter me. You don't have to be modest. It's not petty cleverness. The first prince smiled and said, I was worried about how to clean up the country's vermin. This method is of great use to our Qi kingdom. You should take the lead. When I return to the capital, I will ask for your merit in front of the emperor. The god of wealth Qian was stunned and then his face turned pale. He immediately said, Your highness, please don't. It's my honor to be able to solve your highness's worries. I can't take credit for it. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I won't be able to sleep at night because of fear. If all the corrupt officials knew that this thing was made by him, they would indeed not be able to sleep peacefully in the future. The god of wealth Qian said sincerely, All this is the credit of your highness. I'm very satisfied to be able to do something for your highness in silence behind your back. The first prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at him, nodded with satisfaction and said, You are a smart man who knows how to adapt to circumstances. He had thought that it would take more effort to persuade him to switch to him. He didn't expect that the god of wealth Qian was so sensible. Zhao Zheng was very comforted. I was ordered to supervise all the states and prefectures, and it takes time and effort to check the accounts. This time you have helped I a lot. You can rest assured that I will not treat anyone who has made great contributions unfairly. As long as you do your best to do things for I, you will enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. The god of wealth Qian's face was full of fear and trepidation. He bowed and said, Thank you, your highness. Zhao Jing nodded, handed him the piece of paper and said, Go and tell them in detail how to use this method. Yes, sir. The god of wealth Qian nodded, picked up the piece of paper and walked over. At the gate of King Feng's mansion, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen walked out. When they walked down the steps, Zhao Xiuwen suddenly turned his head and asked, Yinzhou, do you think the god of wealth Qian will make any mistakes? Yang Yinzhou shook his head and said, don't underestimate that old fox. Chapter 689. This is actually very simple. As long as you remember that there is an input and an output, the cumbersome accounts will become simple. You can save a lot of time and reduce the possibility of miscalculation. Fortune God Qian explained very seriously and in great detail. He talked incessantly. His saliva sprayed on the face of an imperial censor, but the censor didn't bother to wipe it off, for fear of missing any important steps. Although they were still full of contempt and contempt for the merchants, the first prince attached great importance to this matter, so they naturally had to pay attention to it. Your Highness, I will leave first. After half an hour, Fortune God Qian cupped his hands and bowed to Zhao Zheng. Zhao Zheng nodded and said, thank you for your hard work. You can leave now. Don't worry, I will treat you well in the future. After Fortune God Qian left, an imperial censor came forward and bowed. Congratulations, Your Highness. With this wonderful method, you will definitely make some achievements to satisfy His Majesty and the court officials. God is helping me. Zhao Zheng smiled and said, you should familiarize yourselves with each other first. Tomorrow we will start from Fengzhou. Everyone's faces showed joy. Before they came to Fengzhou they had some plans. Now that they had such a wonderful method, it was like God was helping them. It would be much easier and more convenient to do things. They would make great achievements in Fengzhou. Not only could the first prince shake the third prince's layout and arrangement in Fengzhou, but they could also get enough political achievements. It was really killing two birds with one stone. Bah! Fortune God Qian walked more than 10 steps out of the courier house. The panic on his face disappeared. He spat to the side and whispered, do you think it is so easy to take advantage of me? In an inn somewhere in Fengzhou, 15 people stood in 2 rows in a room. They cupped their hands and said, greetings, chief. The people that Lu Meng arranged to sell colored glaze were divided into groups of 15. 5 of them were in the open and disguised as foreign merchants. The other 10 were in the dark and belonged to 2 groups of inspection teams. The 3 groups supervised each other and restrained each other to ensure that there would be no embezzlement or escape with the treasures. The Golden Jade Pavilion of the Jing Kingdom was the main target of the Lu Meng. Later, for the sake of safety, they would go to further places such as the Qi Kingdom, the Zhao Kingdom and so on. It seemed to be a coincidence that they met them here, but it was inevitable. A middle-aged man said in surprise, on our way here, we also got the news from the brothel. We only heard that the young master and the chief last appeared in Shuzhou. I didn't expect to meet them here. Li looked at him and asked, are there only 15 of you who have come to the Qi Kingdom? For now we are the only team. The middle-aged man nodded and said, young master, alliance master, should we go back immediately? Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, there's no hurry. The most important thing now is to send the news back to the capital. We need someone to go back first. We'll set off immediately. To some extent, this place was safer than Shuzhou. After all, Fengzhou was too far from the capital. What's more, they had to pass through Shuzhou. If there were only 15 people, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. A month ago, the news from Shuzhou had been sent back. Rui and the others should have received the news by now and made some arrangements. What they needed to do now was to get in touch with them first and then wait. At most, in a month, Mississippi Lu's body would be much better, and there would be no more worries in Shuzhou. I'll write a letter first and ask someone to send it all the way back. Get in touch with the brothel in Shuzhou and pay attention to the news from Shuzhou. Don't forget the important thing. After you go out of this door, you are foreign merchants. Li gave a few instructions. After a while, a man came out of the inn with a horse. After leaving the city, he immediately jumped on the horse and galloped in a certain direction. In the capital of the Jing Kingdom, the little maid was sitting in the yard. When she saw a figure coming out of the house, she hurriedly stood up and ran over to say, Miss, be careful. I'll help you. Rui shook her head and said, it hasn't been long. Miss is not so delicate. The little maid shook her head and said, the old granny said that you have to take care of yourself now. What do you want to eat today? I'll make it. Rui touched her head and said, you've been busy these days. Take a rest. Just tell the kitchen to do these things. No. The little maid shook her head like a rattled drum and said, Miss, the baby will grow better if you eat better. She leaned her head over and listened carefully. She asked, when can I see the baby? Rui thought for a moment and said, probably, in the winter of this year. In the winter, the son-in-law should be able to come back. the little maid murmured as she looked up at the sky outside the courtyard walls. At a certain moment, the door to the courtyard was suddenly pushed open. Old Fang ran in with a happy expression. He panted heavily and said, "Young miss, there's news about the son-in-law and the second young miss." Fang bent over and panted as he said, "The brothel." The news came from the brothel. "The son-in-law and the second miss are in Shuzhou." "Shuzhou?" The little maid clenched her fists and murmured. A smile appeared on Rui's face. She said, "Send someone to the Li family first and tell the old granny this news. Send someone to the crown prince's residence as well. And a few of the general's residences. And," she lowered her head and said softly, "Willow Lane. Go personally." The entire Li family was thoroughly stirred up because of a certain piece of news. Fast horses galloped out of the mansion, turning into wisps of smoke and dust as they scattered in all directions. In the Li manor, the old granny knelt in the temple with tears in her old eyes. In the Shui manor, several old generals drank to their heart's content and started fighting as they drank. "What did you just say? Say it again." In the crown prince's residence, after listening to a guard's report, Li Xian, who was drawing some kind of diagram, suddenly stood up. Only a few words echoed in the room. Willow Lane was as peaceful as ever. In the deepest part of the lane, in a quiet courtyard, Zheng Zumo put down her brush and said, "Let them make a set like this first. If there's anything that needs to be changed, I will let them know." "Yes, young lady. I will go now." A woman behind her nodded, picked up the drawing and left the courtyard. Zheng Zumo sat back in her seat and rubbed her sore shoulders. The next moment, there was a gentle force on both sides of her shoulders. She stood up, held Wan Ruoqing's hand and said, "Didn't the doctor say that you should rest at home these days? What if you catch a cold again? Go in quickly." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "It's so stuffy staying in the room all the time. I have to come out for some fresh air." "Then you sit here. I will go in and get some clothes for you." Zheng Zumo pressed her down and turned to walk into the room. There was a knock on the door. Xiao Chui, who was washing clothes in the corridor, quickly ran over and opened the door. She asked with a smile, "Uncle Fang, you haven't been here for a long time. What's the matter?" Lao Fang walked in and walked up to Wan Ruoqing. He said, "There's news about the son-in-law. He should be in Shuzhou now. We'll send someone to pick him up right away." Wan Ruoqing slowly stood up. At the door of the room, the thin shirt in Zheng Zumo's hands gently fell to the ground. At the palace gate, the guards on the palace wall looked down and shouted, "Who goes there?" Below the palace walls, a person nimbly dismounted from his horse and tossed a waste token onto the wall. "Urgent report from the Intelligence Bureau. I must see His Majesty immediately." Chapter 690. After verifying the identity of the Secret Intelligence Division, a basket was slowly lowered from the palace wall and the person from the Secret Intelligence Division was hoisted up. Soon, several figures rushed into the palace. As they hurried away, a eunuch turned around and asked the man, "His Majesty is already asleep. Are you sure this matter is urgent enough to wake His Majesty up now?" The spy nodded and said, "His Majesty has ordered that as soon as there is news of County Marquis Li, we must report it immediately." "County Marquis Li?" The eunuch glanced at him and said, "Wait here for a moment, I'll go and report." After that, he quickly walked to a palace in front of him. Before he reached the front of the palace, a voice came from the side, "Why disturb His Majesty so late at night?" The eunuch turned around and hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Chief Steward Chang." Chang said lightly, "His Majesty has just fallen asleep. If it's not urgent, we'll talk about it tomorrow." The eunuch respectfully said, "Chief Steward Chang, the spy office has urgent news of County Marquis Li." Chang raised his eyebrows and said, "Let him wait here." After that, he quickly took 2 steps and pushed the door into the main hall. Not long after, lights were lit in the palace. Emperor Jing put on a robe and paced in the hall. He read the letter in his hand several times and said, "The spy office will send 20 high priests to bring him back to me unharmed. After arriving in Shuzhou, take over the soldiers of Shuzhou first so that it's easier to act. If there's any disobedience, you can kill him first and report later." "Yes, Your Majesty." Changde bowed and said. Before the sky was bright, a group of people hurried out of the city with a token and went all the way to the west. At the city gate, Changde reined in his horse and said to a middle-aged Taoist in front of him, "Surnamed Yuan, this time I'll leave County Marquis Li to you. His Majesty has an order to bring him back unharmed." "I'll try my best." The middle-aged Taoist raised his hand to salute, turned his head and said slowly, "Let's go." As Li Xian rode on his horse he asked doubtfully, "Just the few of them? Can they do it?" Changde turned his horse around and explained, "There's only one Grandmaster. The rest of them are all below the level of Grandmaster, and there are few who can match them. It's impossible to attack a city, but it's easy to take the head of the enemy's general amidst an army of tens of thousands. Besides, they have His Majesty's imperial edict in their hands. Wherever they go, they can temporarily mobilize 500 soldiers. It's already very safe. It's been 2 months." Li Xian nodded, reined in his horse and returned to the city. 50 li outside the capital in a huge plaza. Lu Luo stood on the platform and looked down at the crowd of nearly 100 people and loudly said, "The journey to the Shu province is long. Everyone please be careful." Yang Liuqing waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Watching the figures of the crowd gradually disappear, Lu Luo walked down from the high platform and said to the others, "Go back to your work." This time almost all the elites of the Lu League had come. Among the 100 people, any one of them would have a resounding name on the hero ranking. This kind of power was enough to sweep away any force in the martial arts world. The Li family. "Miss, let me go with them." Lao Feng, who was carrying a bag on his back, said with determination. Rui looked at him and said, "They've sent over 100 masters this time. Nothing will go wrong." Feng shook his head and said, "I lost the son-in-law. If I can't find him myself, I won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of my life." A woman walked over and said, "Eldest miss, just let him go." Rui looked at Aunt Feng. After a moment she nodded slightly. A hint of excitement appeared on Feng's face. He said, "Don't worry, Mississippi. Once we find the son-in-law and second miss, we'll be back immediately." With that, he tightened the bag on his back, hugged his wife tightly and dashed out without looking back. The woman blushed. This dead man? Life was always full of surprises. There were many unexpected things. No one knew what was going to happen in the next second. Maybe it would be a hard slap to wake you up and teach you to be a good person. Maybe it would be a big gift from the sky, the kind with a bow on the outside to tell you how beautiful the world was. After being unlucky for so long, his luck had finally changed. It was time to celebrate. He wrapped the freshly made milk candy with glutinous rice paper. When it cooled down it could be eaten. With this thing Mississippi Lu would be much more straightforward when she took the medicine. She didn't have to force herself every time. After a long time the way she looked at him made Li Yi feel a little guilty. Good things should be shared with everyone. He put some in the box that had just been dried and planned to give them to Lin Yong and Lin Wanru. After Lin Yong threw a piece into his mouth, his eyes lit up. He asked, "Li brothers, what is this? It's so delicious. Give me a few more." "These are all for you." Li Yi poured a small half of the contents of the box for him and said, "As for the rest, when your miss comes over, let her have a taste." Lin Yong waved his hand and said, "I have to look after the shop in the front. Miss is in the back. You can go by yourself." He had been familiar with Li Yi for a long time, so he gradually spoke more casually. All right. You look after the shop. I'll go by myself." Li Yi waved his hand and walked to the room in the backyard. In the yard he saw Lin Wanru writing something at the table. Li Yi knocked on the door and walked in. He put the box on the table and said, "I just made it. Try it." Lin Wanru looked at him, picked up a piece and put it in her mouth. She nodded slightly and asked, "Is Miss Lu feeling better?" "Much better." Li Yi nodded. He saw the words "by family" and "Su family" written on the paper in front of her. There seemed to be some numbers behind them. He thought of something and asked, "What's wrong? Haven't you solved the problem of the raw materials?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "We haven't reached an agreement with the Su family and the Ma family. Raising the price by 10% should be their first step. If we agree, I'm afraid they will immediately ask for more. As for the Bai family, I'm just like them." Li looked at her and asked, "What are you going to do?" Lin Wanru said, "Find someone else to cooperate with. If Fanglin Park doesn't pick up the goods from the 3 families, the jewelry shops in Feng province won't be able to handle the goods from the 3 families. When that time comes they will be anxious." Li thought about it and said, "Speaking of this, I know a few friends who might be able to solve your problem." Lin Wanru looked up at him and asked doubtfully, "You have friends in Feng province?" "I just met them." Li looked at her and said, "I should have mentioned to you before that there is a country called Great Britain that is rich in colored glaze and has no shortage of jewelry. I happened to meet a few foreign businessmen from Great Britain yesterday. I'll help you ask if they have the goods and if they are willing to cooperate with you." Lin Wanru stood up and looked at him. Then I'll have to trouble you. Li Yi waved his hand and said, we're on the same side. It's what I should do. Lin Yong leaned against the door of the shop and took out a milky white lump from the box. He threw it into the air and caught it with his mouth. His eyes wandered and he wondered what the Queen of Great Britain's 3 palaces and 6 courtyards looked like. On the street, an extremely slovenly old man with worn-out clothes and messy hair took out a small porcelain bottle from his bosom. He poured out a pill from it and threw it into his mouth. His brows instantly furrowed. He hurriedly took out a cloth bag from his arms. When he opened it he saw that it was empty. His face changed involuntarily. The sloppy old man sighed, and a look of frustration and confusion appeared on his face. He had lost the person and the candy. Although the antidote could last for a long time, if he couldn't find the person he would still end up the same. It was just a matter of time. Should he continue to search like a headless fly in the Qi kingdom, or should he return to the Jing kingdom and wait for news? This was a difficult question. Suddenly, as if he smelled something, he sniffed and quickly turned his head to look in a certain direction. A man was leaning against the door of the shop. He was bored to death, throwing something white into the air and catching it with his mouth. Lin Yong was still absent-mindedly repeating the action just now. However, when he habitually closed his mouth this time, he found that the sweet thing did not fall into his mouth. He actually wasted one. He shook his head in disappointment and threw another one. Still nothing. When he threw the third candy, Lin Yong finally realized something. He lowered his head and saw an extremely sloppy old man standing in front of him. The old man was currently putting a candy into his mouth. Chapter 691. An intoxicated expression appeared on the sloppy old man's face. How could he have such an expression after eating candy? Lin Yong waved his hand angrily and scolded, "Where did this beggar come from? Get lost." He had thought that his accuracy had deteriorated due to overwork. He did not expect this old beggar to rob him. He had never seen such a bold beggar. Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves. Fanglin Garden had been attracting beggars for the past 2 days. Many customers had been scared away and there had been a lot of business. If this old man did not know what was good for him, he was prepared to take some tough measures. The old man nodded in satisfaction with the candy in his mouth. He did not care about what Lin Yong had done. He pointed at the box in his hand and asked, "Where can I buy this?" This kind of milk candy was only sold in the capital of the Jing kingdom. This was the first time he had seen it anywhere else since he left the capital. "What's there to sell? Let's go." Lin Yong waved his hand. He did not want to argue with him about what had happened just now. He thought that there was no point in arguing with a beggar. Instead, it would lower his status. "Let's go." "You?" Seeing that the old man was unmoved, Lin Yong had just finished speaking when the sloppy old man raised his head and glanced at him. It was this look that made Lin Yong shiver involuntarily. It was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. He felt cold from head to toe. He could not say what he wanted to say no matter what. The old man looked at him and asked again, "Where can I buy this?" Lin Yong said subconsciously, "No, I don't sell it." The sloppy old man frowned. At this moment a figure walked out of the shop. Li looked at Lin Yong and said, "If you have finished eating you can go over there and get more. I made a lot this time. 2 people can't finish it." The sloppy old man raised his head and looked at the familiar yet strange young man who had walked out of the shop. His nose suddenly felt a little sour. Suffering from the strange poison, trekking over mountains and rivers, sprinting for thousands of miles, eating and sleeping in the open, experiencing countless hardships to arrive here step by step, and all these hardships had finally vanished into thin air at this moment. Li looked at the beggar with sparkling eyes and sighed. Everyone had their own way of living. There were high and mighty emperors, and there were beggars who lived at the bottom of society. Everyone had different worries. For the former they might think about how to conquer cities and stabilize the country, but for the latter they would be moved to tears just by eating a piece of candy. Being able to fill their stomachs and survive was probably their only pursuit. He took out a piece of silver and handed it over, saying, "Take it, go eat something." The old man combed his messy hair to the side and said in a trembling voice, "It's me." Lin Yong was stunned. He looked at Li Yi and then at the old beggar with a puzzled expression. Li Yi's hand was in midair. At that moment he felt like he had won the lottery. "I took this from home. It's Uncle Lin's clothes. Wear it first." Lin Yong took a piece of clothes and said, "Li brothers, you have such an old servant in your family. Why haven't I heard you mention it before?" Li explained, "At that time we met mountain bandits and accidentally got separated. It's really fate that we can meet again here." "It's not easy." Lin Yong put down the clothes and looked at the sloppy old man who was washing his face. He turned back and whispered, "I'll get something for him to eat." Just now his eyes were green with hunger. "I'm scared just looking at him." Of course, a guru was terrifying. In such an era he could even be called a nuclear weapon. His martial arts cultivation had already reached the peak. He could use his own momentum to make ordinary people or even ordinary masters directly collapse. Killing with a glance was nothing. The sloppy old man changed into a set of clean clothes and swept his gaze across the courtyard. The two people he was looking for were both there. He drank a mouthful of wine and casually threw a piece of candy into his mouth. He only felt that the heavy burden on his shoulders had been lifted in an instant. The task was completed. There was candy and wine. What more could he ask for in life? Li sat beside him and looked at him. He asked, "Why are you here?" "Someone asked me to come here. He asked me to bring you back unscathed." The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "You know, we people in Jianghu pay most attention to the word righteousness. Since I promised him I must do it." Li thought for a moment and asked again, "What's the situation in Shuzhou now?" "They still don't know that you have come to the Qi kingdom. They have been searching for you. I heard that the king of Shu has even offered a reward of 10,000 taels of silver, vowing to find you." The old man looked at him and asked, "Do you have a good relationship with the king of Shu?" Li waved his hand and said, "Just a little." The old man said, "Then let's go back immediately. When we reach Shuzhou we don't have to worry about the power of the Taoist nun." Ahem. Li coughed twice and said, "Don't worry. You have fought with the Taoist nun. Aren't you injured? Stay here and recuperate for a while. We will leave after resting for a while." The king of Shu was an idiot. If he had used this kind of perseverance on other things, he would have become the crown prince long ago. He would not have been sent to a remote place like Shuzhou. He weighed the pros and cons carefully. Although there was one more injured grandmaster, a grandmaster could not kill thousands of people. Given his friendship with the king of Shu, it would still be difficult for him to pass through Shuzhou and return safely. "My injury is not a problem. As long as I don't meet a grandmaster, I will be fine." The sloppy old man clapped his hands and said, "You should pack up first and set off early to avoid more trouble." Li stood up, looked at him and said, "You should recuperate first. What if your injury worsens? Your health is the most important. I will find a place for you in the inn next door. You can stay there first. This matter is settled." One could not be too selfish. It was not easy for the old man to travel thousands of miles. He had just had a chance to rest, but he had to torture him again. If he really did this, was he still human? The sloppy old man watched him walk out of the yard. The expression on his old face was a little stunned. After a while it became a little complicated. In Fanglin Garden, Lin Wanru put down her pen and looked at Li Yi and asked, "How do you plan to settle that old man?" Li Yi said, "Let him stay in the inn next door." It was not easy for the old man to come all the way here. "If there is any difficulty you can tell me." Lin Wanru nodded, looked up at him and asked, "The foreign merchants? I've already negotiated with them." Li Yi smiled and said, "They are also in urgent need of money. They have a lot of jewelry which was brought from the Jing kingdom. I can provide them to you directly. The price is negotiable." Lin Wanru thought for a while and said, "If the jewelry has been shaped, I'm afraid the price will not be low." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry about that. I heard from these foreign merchants that their former shopkeeper owed hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. He ran away with his sister-in-law and didn't even pay them their wages. They were forced to take these jewels and sell them cheaply. The original price of 1,000 taels of silver can now be bought for 300 taels of silver. The price won't be too high and even your labor fees will be saved." "Really?" Lin Wanru raised her head and her beautiful eyes lit up. "Really?" Li Yi nodded. If those goods were converted into taels of silver, it would be inconvenient to carry them. Silver notes could only be exchanged in the Qi kingdom. If they wanted to go back, these things would be a burden. So he simply did her a favor. Chapter 692. If that's true, that would be great. Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "It's just that, he actually eloped with his wife's sister. That shopkeeper's character is too despicable. It's best not to make wild guesses if you don't know the truth." Li shook his head and said, "Maybe he had no other choice or maybe he was just wronged or misunderstood." Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, Heartless men are not worth discussing. Let's talk about the cooperation with those foreign merchants. No, how is he heartless? I wonder how much goods they have? What if he was also forced? Isn't this? Is it finished goods or raw materials? The injustice of the owner of the glass shop could not be cleared. Li sighed and explained, they have a lot of goods. The Lin family definitely can't eat them all, and they won't sell all of them to you. The goods are all finished goods. Great Britain is rich in glass, but it lacks other gems and jade. This time they are using glass to exchange for these things and plan to sell them back home. Lin Wanru was puzzled and asked, if that's the case, why did they cede them to us? Li Yi continued to explain, Great Britain is just a small country. Who would they sell so many gems and jade to? They also want to sell some here first so that they can reduce the pressure when they go back. If they have too many goods and can't sell them, wouldn't that be a loss? Lin Wanru thought about it and looked at him. She reminded him, there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. I still feel that there's something fishy about this. You have to be careful and don't be fooled by them. Why is this girl so insensitive? Li Yi felt a headache coming on and said, how about this, those people are still in the city. If there's anything you can talk to them personally when you have time. Although he wanted to help the Lin family get through this hurdle, some things couldn't be said. Li Yi waved his hand and said, those foreign merchants are staying in the inn next door. I'll ask them to look for you later. As he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, Li Yi suddenly realized something. That night, Lin Wanru accidentally left the paper with the debit and credit bookkeeping method in the Qian family. It was picked up by the god of wealth, but he didn't know whether he understood it or not. Thinking about it carefully, it was just a simple example. The possibility of an ordinary person understanding it was not high. Even if they were really enlightened, it would not cause much of a stir when used for a small-scale audit. What I'm afraid of is that not only does he understand it, but he also becomes patriotic and wants to eliminate the traitors for the country. He wants to return the world to a bright and clear sky. Then, when he presents this method, he happens to meet an upright official who wants to make a great contribution and use it to carry out the anti-corruption work. It's like fighting flies and tigers at the same time. If that was the case, there would be a good show to watch. Although this possibility was indeed pitifully small, if any part of it was missing, it would not have the desired effect. However, there was no show to watch. He wasn't so bored that he had to harm the third prince, Zhao Yi. After all, the third prince had treated him well. If it wasn't for the jade pendant, Mississippi Lu's body would not have recovered so well. If one did too many ungrateful things, there would be retribution. What a pity. Li Yi sighed and walked out of the door of the shop. Today was an extremely ordinary day for the people of Feng Province. Most people were busy making a living as usual. However, some officials in the city could not help but be on tenterhooks. This time, the eldest prince personally led many imperial censors and 500 personal guards to inspect the area on behalf of the emperor. Every time they arrived at a place, they would stay for a few days to listen to the public opinion and inspect the local officials. They had the power to dismiss officials below the 6th rank. If the officials above the 6th rank had committed a serious crime, they could be detained and brought back to the capital. Feng Province was the third prince's fief. Everyone knew about the relationship between the eldest prince and the third prince. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The eldest prince would certainly not let it go easily. The officials of Feng Province had to pray for their own good fortune. Have you all figured out the method? The eldest prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at the imperial censors in a temporary guest house in Feng Province and asked. The imperial censors replied in unison, Your Highness, we have figured it out. Zhao Zheng nodded and said, This time, we have been ordered by His Majesty to supervise the prefectures. We must act in accordance with the law. We must not disappoint His Majesty and the people of Deqi. Go. Everyone complied. As they walked out of the guest house, they saw more than 10 figures in front of them. An official who was walking in front of them cupped his fists and said, I have been ordered by the third prince to assist you. Sirs, please. The imperial censors looked at each other and did not know what to do. Suddenly, the eldest prince's voice was heard from behind. Speaking of which, the third imperial brother's people are indeed more familiar with Feng Province. Zhao Zheng walked out and said with a smile, Remember to thank the third imperial brother for me when you go back. After everyone had left, an accompanying official came forward and said with a frown, Your Highness, the third imperial brother clearly does not trust you. Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, Since he is worried, let those people follow. I am only acting on orders. It is good that the officials of Feng Province are safe. If something happens, I believe the third imperial brother will not protect them. Otherwise, he smiled and waved his hand saying, let's go and have a look. I am also very curious about what is so special about Feng Province. In the central pavilion in the back garden of King Feng's mansion, the middle-aged man held a black chess piece in his hand. After thinking for a long time, he placed it on the chessboard. He looked up at the young man opposite him and said, they should have left by now. Zhao Yi held the white chess piece and quickly placed it on a spot. He casually asked, who in the capital will be unhappy this time? The middle-aged man picked up another black chess piece, but was not in a hurry to place it down. After thinking for a while, he said, the accounts of the mansion have already been thoroughly checked overnight. There are indeed some loopholes in some places. The one in question is the nephew of the Minister of Revenue. Zhao Yi sighed softly and said, if I remember correctly, Minister Zhou of the Ministry of Revenue has no children. He only has this nephew. When he came to Feng Province, he asked I to take care of him. I plan to transfer him back to the capital in the future. This time, I am afraid that I will have to break my promise. Your Highness, there is no need to be like this. The middle-aged man placed a chess piece down and said, he can only blame himself for being too greedy. The amount of money he has embezzled is too large. Presumably, the supervising imperial censors will not let it go so easily. Speaking of which, it is my fault as the provincial governor. Tomorrow I will send a memorial to the capital. If it wasn't for the great prince, I'm afraid there would have been even more serious losses. I must put in a good word for the great prince in front of his majesty. Zhao Yi placed a white chess piece down and said with a smile, I'm afraid the yamen is in a mess right now. You, the provincial governor, are playing chess with I. You should go back quickly. How about we end this game here? The middle-aged man looked at the chessboard and shook his head. He smiled bitterly and said, thank you, Your Highness. If we continue, I will immediately lose. He stood up, cupped his hands in a salute and said, I will take my leave. At the same time that the middle-aged man walked out of the mansion, an imperial censor came out of the Feng Prefecture Yamen. With a serious expression, he read out a few names and waved his hand at the soldiers behind him. Take them all away. A few of the officials who were standing in a row immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Their faces were ashen. One of them could not help but be frightened and collapsed on the ground. The rest of the people looked at each other and could not hide the shock on their faces. The imperial censors sent by the imperial court this time were completely different from before. They were able to find these people so easily and decisively without any sloppiness. On the second day of his arrival in Feng Province, the great prince had already expressed his attitude. Seeing their colleagues who had been joking with them in the morning, being taken away at this moment, and some of them might not even be able to see them again in the future, everyone had different expressions on their faces. Their hearts were extremely complicated. His Excellency has been taken away. Quickly send a letter to the capital. It is said that the first prince has a wonderful method that can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. We need to be vigilant about this. We have to report this to His Excellency quickly. This is extremely urgent. Immediately send this letter to the capital and remind them to be more careful. Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and saw a large group of soldiers escorting a few people on the street. He could not help but sigh and said softly, the security in Feng Prefecture is really not good. Chapter 693. How's the talk with them? Li Yi stood at the door of the room and asked Lin Wanru. It's been settled. Lin Wanru nodded and looked at him. They'll deliver the goods today. They said that if they come to the Qi Kingdom again in the future, they'll also look for the Lin family to cooperate. There was still a trace of doubt on her face. The Lin family needed to pay a very small price to cooperate with these foreign merchants. It was almost a business that was profitable without any loss. However, doing business had to bear a certain amount of risk. How could there be a thing that was profitable without any loss? After the initial surprise, she quickly calmed down and began to think about some deeper things. These foreign merchants could indeed solve the difficulties of the Lin family. If they could achieve a long-term cooperation with them, they could completely get rid of the Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family. And the low price they offered would make the Lin family have a huge profit. Everything was beneficial to the Lin family. However, would there really be people in this world who would be so selfless to give money to her for nothing? The more it was like this, the more she felt that those people should have some ulterior motives. The greater the profit they offered, the greater the conspiracy, which made her feel more uneasy. However, after discussing with those foreign merchants just now, she began to feel uncertain about this idea in her heart. All the agreements about the cooperation were very clear. After reading them word by word, she didn't find anything wrong. These foreign merchants might really be short of money, so they sold those goods at a low price. In this case, the owner of the glass shop who eloped with his wife and sister had unknowingly helped the Lin family a lot. Thinking of this, the feeling of disgust in her heart actually weakened a little. As if thinking of something, Lin Wanru suddenly looked up at him and asked, "Although there aren't many jewelry shops in Fengzhou City, there are still a few. Why did they choose the Lin family? These goods aren't mine." How would I know why they chose the Lin family? But it could also be because of those foreign merchants. Business is business. Miss Lin, you must be careful. Remember to beware of those people. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "The security in Fengzhou City hasn't been very good recently. I've seen soldiers arresting people outside these 2 days. In short, Miss Lin, please be careful. Those are imperial censors from the capital who are investigating corrupt officials. They've caused quite a ruckus in the last few days. I heard that they have some sort of wondrous technique that allows them to investigate in an extremely short amount of time." Lin Wanru couldn't continue. She glanced at Li Yi and a strange expression suddenly appeared on her face. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said, "It's good to investigate corrupt officials. These corrupt officials only know how to plunder the people's wealth and not let them live a good life. They should have been investigated long ago." Lin Wanru looked at him in a daze and whispered, "Is it that night? Hey, what night? Girls should pay attention to what you say. It's not good to be heard by others." "I don't know what you're talking about." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to leave. "I have to go back to cook. See you later, Miss Lin." Lin Wanru stood in the same place and flipped through the account books on the table. Her face was filled with doubt, confusion, and all kinds of mixed emotions. When she finally raised her head and looked out of the door, there was no one there. No one could escape. What was to come would come. Maybe all of this was destined. Li Yi hummed a lively tune as he walked into the courtyard. Out of habit, he raised his head to take a look. The window of one of the rooms on the upper floor of the inn was open. That was where the old man surnamed Su was temporarily staying. Grandmaster Li Yi had seen several of them, including Rui Oldman Chang, Taoist nun, second granduncle, and the monster Su upstairs. He always thought that grandmasters should have a sage-like appearance. They could destroy strong enemies with a wave of their hands, and then they could leave with a wave of their sleeves, leaving nothing behind. It was the first time he saw a grandmaster who ate white rabbit creamy candies as if they were rice. Mississippi Lu often did some activities in the courtyard. She was no different from a normal person now, and a dozen normal people were definitely no match for her. Judging from the fact that he was still standing here, it should be some time before Mississippi Lu fully recovered. Li Yi walked into the kitchen and brought out the warm medicine. He walked to the stone table, looked back at Mississippi Lu and said, "Put down the sword first. It's time to drink the medicine." "Drink? A toast to shopkeeper Su." "Haha, young Master Bai, you're too kind." In a private room of a restaurant in the city, Bai Yu raised his wine cup and looked at the two men opposite him. He smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su, let me give you a toast. Many thanks to the two of you for this matter." You're welcome, you're welcome." A man with a short beard smiled and said, "Our three families are united, and that's how we got to where we are today. We should help each other for such a small matter." The other man next to him said, "Moreover, if nephew Bai can take down the Lin family, it'll be a good thing for us." The man with the short beard thought about it and said, "I'm afraid that the Lin family will fight us to the death. That'll be troublesome. The Lin family shouldn't be so irrational. Apart from the three of us, they have no other source of goods in the entire Feng province. If they really fight us to the death, their losses will be even greater. That's not necessarily the case. Miss Lin is now in power. Everything related to the Lin family's business is decided by her. You know her temper, and she has many tricks up her sleeve. It's not impossible for her to fight us to the death." Bai Yu cleared his throat and said, "Don't worry, since I'm the one who suggested this, I won't let you suffer. Without the goods, the Lin family won't be able to hold on for long. We just need to wait patiently. Even if something happens, the Bai family will be able to take all the goods from both families." "That's good." The two men smiled and nodded. They raised their wine glasses and said, "Let's drink, let's drink." The door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. A man dressed like a shop assistant walked in and whispered a few words in the short-bearded man's ear. The short-bearded man put down his wine glass and asked, "Really?" The shop assistant nodded vigorously. "He's waiting in the shop right now." The short-bearded man's eyes flashed a few times. He stood up and cupped his hands towards Bai Yu and the other man. He smiled and said, "Brother Su, nephew Bai, something happened in the shop. I'll be taking my leave first." "It's fine." Bai Yu nodded. Seeing him leave in a hurry, the man surnamed Su and Bai Yu looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with doubt. The man surnamed Su glanced at him and asked, "Shall we go take a look?" "Let's go." Bai Yu nodded. The Ma family made a living by selling jade materials. They had a few shops, and although they weren't considered a big business, they could still be considered a wealthy family. They had a bit of a reputation in Feng province. At this moment, shopkeeper Ma hurriedly stepped into the shop. As soon as he entered, he impatiently asked, "Where are the glass materials?" Inside the shop, a few strangely dressed men stood there. One of them was speaking to the shop assistant in a strange manner while gesturing with his hands. On the street, Bai Yu and the man surnamed Su were quickly walking over. Chapter 694. The strangely dressed man casually took out a piece of green transparent irregular object and said, "These colored glaze materials are all real. You can inspect them and ask someone to process them. It won't take much effort to make a good colored glaze ware. If we weren't in urgent need of silver, we would definitely process them ourselves and not sell them to you." The shop assistant looked at him with a puzzled face and asked, "You didn't speak like that just now." The foreign merchant was stunned and asked, "Then how did I speak like that?" Yes, you spoke like that." The shop assistant twitched his mouth and immediately shut his mouth after saying that. He was worried that if he continued talking to him, he would also speak like that in the future. Shopkeeper Ma didn't pay attention to the conversation between the two. All his attention was on the piece of colored glaze in his hand. After a moment, he withdrew his gaze and took a deep breath, asking, "How much is the piece of colored glaze in your hand worth?" The man weighed the colored glaze in his hand and said, 3,000 taels. 3,000 taels? Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "If it's a real piece of colored glaze ware, 3,000 taels isn't expensive. But this is just a raw material. How can it be worth 3,000 taels? You're in this line of business, so you should know that it doesn't cost much to make a piece of colored glaze ware." The foreign merchant opened his mouth and paused. He looked at the shop assistant next to him and said, "The important thing is the raw material. 3,000 taels isn't expensive. I'm in the raw material business, so I naturally know the rules of this line of business." Boss Ma smiled and said, "It's risky to carve the raw materials into jewelry. How about 2,000 taels of silver? We have a lot of colored glaze and wanted to find someone who is worth cooperating with." The man shook his head, took the colored glaze in his hand and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, he turned back and said, "Since you're not sincere, we'll find someone else." At the door, a middle-aged man stopped him and said with a smile, Wait. Our Su family is also in this line of business. 3,000 taels it is. The price is negotiable. Can I have a look at this piece of colored glaze first?" Shopkeeper Ma quickly walked out and happened to see the middle-aged man holding the piece of glass and looking it up and down. His heart sank and he immediately stepped forward and said, "Brother Su, how could you do something like stealing business? Don't you know the rules?" The man looked up at him and said with a smile, "Brother Ma, what are you talking about? This is obviously a business that you don't want to do. Don't tell me you don't want others to do it? What business do you mean I won't do? Aren't I discussing it now?" Shopkeeper Ma walked over with a face full of smiles as he stopped in front of the foreign merchant and said, Come. Brother, I was in the wrong just now. Come in and have a cup of tea, we can talk about it slowly." The man surnamed Su said, "All right, I'm thirsty. Let's talk inside." Shopkeeper Ma looked back and said, "What do you mean? Let's talk inside. I'm discussing business with this brother. What are you doing here?" The man surnamed Su said with a sullen face, "Brother Ma, this is a bit too much. Can your Ma family handle such a big business?" The young man surnamed Bai immediately stepped forward to smooth things over. "Shopkeepers, we've been friends for so many years. Let's not hurt each other because of such a small matter. Shopkeeper Su, Shopkeeper Ma accepted this business first. Why don't we let them talk first? There must be some rules, right?" After saying that, he looked at the foreign merchant and asked, "You just said that you have a lot of glass? This damn Su family and Ma family. We've been working together for so many years. How can they raise the price just like that? What a despicable person. In the courtyard, Lin Yong was squatting on the ground, snorting as he ate the noodles and complained angrily. Li Yi used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing the medicine for Lady Lu. Merchants only pursue profit. Don't take friendship seriously. Money is their true friend. Don't think that the three of them are in the same boat now. If there is a conflict of interest, they will turn hostile faster than anyone else, said Li Yi casually as he used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing medicine for Lady Lu. Lin Yong interrupted, "My lady is not like that." Alright, I know your lady is a good person. Kindness will be rewarded. It's not that she won't repay her kindness, but it's not time yet. Li Yi added more firewood to the pot and said, "You don't have to be too angry. No matter what you do, you have to have a bottom line. Otherwise you'll suffer retribution. Those who cheat others will be cheated. This has been the truth since ancient times. Maybe those families will soon suffer retribution." Lin Yong snorted and finished eating the noodles. He put down the bowl and said gloomily, "Why haven't I seen evil get retribution? Good people don't live long, but scourges last for thousands of years. In this world, evil people live more freely." Li Yi saw that a window of a room in the inn next door was opened. He stood up and handed the fan to Lin Yong. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Believe me, there will always be retribution. It's just a matter of time. I'll go out for a while. Help me watch the fire for a while." Lin Yong squatted down and fanned the fire from time to time. Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and walked into the inn next door. He went straight up to the second floor and knocked on a door 3 times. After 3 knocks, the door opened. Inside the room, a man stood up and said, "I've just reached an agreement with those 3 families. Those raw materials will be given to them. It's not convenient for us to use silver notes, so let them directly trade with gold." Unlike other things, colored glass was not only valuable after it was made into colored glass wares. Even if it was just a ball, it was also an auspicious sign and treasure in people's eyes. That thing could be burned in large quantities every day, so there was no time to carve it one by one. It could be casually burned and sold for money. It didn't take time and effort, and it was extremely convenient. The Bai family, the Su family, and the Ma family had obviously joined hands this time to force Lin Wanru to give in. It just so happened that there was no place to sell these things. Previously they lived in other people's houses, so they would do whatever they could to help. The man smiled and asked tentatively, "Young master, do you think we can get 10 more points this time?" Li Yi looked at them and said with a smile, "Everyone has worked hard these days. When we go back, everyone will get 50 more points." A few people's faces lit up, and they cupped their fists and said, "Thank you, young master." After Li Yi left, one person closed the door, but the joy on their faces still did not fade. A young man's face lit up with anticipation, and he said, 50 points in addition to the previous points, we can get Senior Lu to teach us martial arts once. I plan to exchange 500 taels of silver to buy a house in the capital and bring my mother back." Another middle-aged man smiled and said, "Xiaowu, what about you?" A young man sitting in the corner smiled and said, "I also plan to buy a house next to yours and then I'll go back and propose. Xiao has already waited for me for 3 years, but that old guy didn't agree. This time I'll go back and smash him to death with silver." "Ha, you're ambitious." The conversation in the room was limited to this small space. In another part of the city, Bai Yu and 2 other middle-aged men were gathered together, also talking in low voices. Bai Yu looked at the 2 of them and said, "This is a big business and only our 3 families can handle it. You 2 should stop fighting. They actually only want gold. Where are we going to get it? Gold is easy, we can just go to the bank and exchange it. The problem is that we don't have that much silver on hand unless we sell that batch of goods to the Lin family. If that's the case, then we'll be letting nephew buy down." Bai Yu smiled and waved his hand, saying, "It's fine, this business is very important." The 2 of them nodded. Faced with such a big business, they who were in urgent need of money, naturally would not turn down such a huge profit for a promise. The opportunity could not be missed and it would not come again. Next time they would not encounter such a stupid foreign merchant. In the shop in front, a shop assistant scratched his head in confusion and mumbled, "Foreigners all talk like this." Chapter 695. The city of Feng Province was in a mess these days. Every day, officers and soldiers could be seen arresting people and passing through the streets. Not only the officials of Feng Province were in a panic, but also the common people were affected. There were fewer pedestrians on the streets than usual. Some officers and soldiers passed by just now. I wonder who was arrested this time? I heard that it was the district magistrate of the neighboring county. He embezzled a lot of money and people's lives were involved. He deserved it. This is the end of corrupt officials. Who knows? The first prince brought people to Feng province to make trouble. Obviously he is targeting the third prince. Maybe it was them. Sure. How dare you say that? Aren't you afraid of losing your head? Second, Miss Lu wanted to drink fish soup today. In order to pick out fresh fish, Li Yi woke up early and went to the market. He carried a fish in his hand. When he walked on the street he heard many similar words. The situation of the royal family of the Qi kingdom was different from that of the Jing kingdom. Few sons of the emperor of the Jing kingdom were successful. But the emperor of the Qi kingdom was different. He had several princes. Although they were not outstanding, they had their own talents. Among them, the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi, was the best. At such a young age, he had done many great things that were praised by the officials and the emperor. In more than 10 years, he developed the barren Feng province into an important city of the country. He was surrounded by countless talents and enjoyed a high prestige among the people. He was also an outstanding figure of the younger generation, a real master of both literature and martial arts. Because of this, the third prince, Zhao Yi, enjoyed a high prestige among the people of the Qi kingdom. Many officials in the court thought highly of him and thought that he was the best candidate to inherit the throne in the future. In some things, the Qi kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the surrounding countries. Nominally, the eldest son of the legal wife inherited the throne. But since the establishment of the Qi kingdom, there were not many princes who really inherited the throne. Because the eldest son of the legal wife was incompetent, he was replaced by a more outstanding prince. Such things happened frequently in the history of the Qi kingdom. Even the officials and citizens of the Qi kingdom had formed a mindset of, if you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, there's someone else. Not to mention that he was only the eldest son of the legitimate wife for the time being. Even if he had already become the crown prince, they would not be able to relax until the last moment of the former emperor's life. The first prince of the Qi kingdom must be feeling a lot of pressure, especially when he had a younger brother who was more outstanding than him in every aspect and was even more handsome than him. That was why he had worked so hard this time. In just a few days, the storm had spread from Fengzhou city to the surrounding counties, and even to further places. In any case, the surrounding prefectures could be considered as the third prince's sphere of influence. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Over the past few days, Li Yi had learned quite a lot about the Qi kingdom. To a certain extent, the first prince of the Qi kingdom was also a pitiful person. If he had been born in the Jing kingdom, he would not have needed to compete with so many people. The throne would have been easy and stable. As long as he was not like the king of Shu, who was determined to seek death from the capital city to Shuzhou, he would have inherited the throne without any suspense. It would have been better if he had stayed in the capital and enjoyed a comfortable life. He would not have been like what he was doing now, running all over the country with a group of imperial censors just to increase his chances of seizing power. If he was not careful, he might even offend a lot of people. Why bother? Li Yi sighed and picked up the fish to have a look. It was still alive. If it was dead, the soup would not be fresh. When he walked to the gate of Fanglin Garden, Lin Yong walked in from outside. When he saw him, he was startled and immediately walked up to him. He said, "Just in time. Miss wants to see you. Come in with me." "What's the matter?" Li Yi stopped and asked. Lin Yong pulled his arm and said, "The Ma family and the Su family are here. They seem to want to discuss something." "Oh, it's too late. Let's go there first." Li Yi handed the fish to him and said, "I'll go there myself. Help me put this fish into the tank. I'm going to make soup tonight. Don't kill it." Lin Yong nodded and said, "Okay. What time tonight?" "I'll go there after I finish my work in the shop." "Wanru, we were indeed in the wrong in the previous matter." Shopkeeper Ma sat in his seat and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He said apologetically, "It's just that the market has changed recently. If we don't raise the price, we'll lose money. I hope you won't blame us." Shopkeeper Su hurriedly said, "That's right. We've been working together for so many years. When the Lin family was still in your grandfather's hands, they bought from us. It's not worthwhile to hurt our relationship because of such a small matter. Don't you think so?" Lin Wanru looked at the two of them and asked, "Why don't the two of you get straight to the point? Why are you here today?" "It's about the goods. We've thought it through." Shopkeeper Ma stood up and looked at her. He said, "How about we trade according to the price we discussed before?" Shopkeeper Su nodded and said, "Yes, yes. We'll trade according to the price we discussed at the beginning." After we went back we thought about it. This matter was indeed our fault. We've been friends for so many years. Even if we lose a little money we can't let you suffer a loss. Lin Wanru looked at the two of them. Her expression was calm, but there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Before today the Ma family and the Su family insisted on the price and were unwilling to budge. Why did they suddenly change their minds? They were so anxious to sell that batch of goods to the Lin family. Could it be that there was something wrong with that batch of goods? The two of you can go back first. I'll think about this matter. Lin Wanru thought for a moment and looked at the two of them. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed slightly. What was there to think about? They were going to trade with those foreign merchants tomorrow. If they couldn't sell that batch of goods they wouldn't be able to gather enough money. At that time, wouldn't that deal with a sure profit and no loss be ruined? Shopkeeper Ma said in a hurried tone, Wanru, what else is there to think about? Let's go according to the original price. Miss Lin, why are you looking for me? Li stood at the door and looked at Lin Wanru. Shopkeeper Ma's words were interrupted. He looked at her with a dissatisfied expression. Lin Wanru stood up and said, come in first. In the past she did things swiftly and decisively. She wouldn't be influenced by outsiders when she did business. However, she didn't know when she started to care more about the opinions of the people in front of her. Although the other party was just a scholar, he could always give her a lot of inspiration when he talked about business. Time would always prove that his ideas were right. Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and asked Lin Wanru tentatively, Wanru, this is the Lin family's accountant. Li looked at him and said, please wait here for a moment. Lin Wanru said to the two of them first. After nodding slightly at Li, she turned and walked into the inner room. Li slowly followed her. The Ma family and the Su family are going to cooperate with the Lin family again? Li asked. They said that they are willing to trade for the raw materials at the price we discussed before. Lin Wanru nodded and said, they didn't back down at all yesterday. Today they are so attentive. I don't know what they are planning. Li looked at her and asked, haven't you bought a lot of things from the foreign merchants? Can you still eat those goods? It's a bit difficult. Lin Wanru shook her head and said, but with those goods, the Lin family won't have to rely on these three families for a few years. It's an opportunity. Li thought for a moment and said, then let's go. Seeing the two of them coming out, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su immediately went to greet them. Shopkeeper Su asked eagerly, Wanru, have you thought about it? Li smiled and walked forward. He said, the Lin family, the Ma family, and the Su family have been cooperating for so many years. Do you still need to think about this? The two of them looked at the young man in front of them and were stunned. Since when did the affairs of the Lin family become decided by an accountant? However, seeing that Lin Wanru didn't move, Shopkeeper Ma seemed to have realized something. He smiled and said, that's good. That's good. Then the price will be according to, the price is not a problem as long as it's cheap. Li waved his hand and said, sit down and talk. Chapter 696. Seeing that Lin Wanru's attitude seemed to have changed, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su sat down at ease and took a sip of tea. Shopkeeper Ma said unhurriedly, both our families have prepared the goods. May I know when the Lin family will pick them up? There's no rush. Li picked up his teacup and took a sip. Before that, there's one more thing I need to make clear to the two of you. Lin Wanru looked at him, then at the teacup in his hand. Her lips parted slightly, but in the end she did not say anything. Feel free to speak your mind, Manager Su said with a smile. He looked at the young man sitting in the main seat, then at Lin Wanru. He thought to himself, the Bai family has plotted against the Lin family for so long, but in the end, it was all for someone else's benefit. Fortunately, Bai did not come today. Otherwise, if he had seen this scene he did not know how he would feel. Li looked at them and said, a few days ago you unilaterally raised the price. Shopkeeper Ma said anxiously, that's all in the past. Li waved his hand and said, because of your price increase, the Lin family just bought a batch of jewelry yesterday. At this time, we do not have enough money to accept these two batches of goods. Is that so? Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed. Therefore we can only accept goods from one family. Li looked at the two of them and said, as for whether it is the Ma family or the Su family, you two can discuss it yourselves. Having said that, he took another sip of tea and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He smiled and said, today's tea is quite good. Did you change the tea leaves? Lin Wanru's gaze lingered on his teacup. She said, no, it might be because of the water. The water today was specially picked from the mountain spring by Big Brother Lin. Having said that, she glanced at shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su, whose expressions had changed slightly, but did not say anything. The price of the jewelry bought from the foreign merchants was low. Although it was not a small amount, the Lin family did not have to worry about it. If they really wanted to accept the goods from the Ma and Su families, they would only be a little nervous. He glanced at Li Yi again and he more or less understood the meaning of Li Yi's words. One family? Shopkeeper Ma's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that the Lin family had already found a new partner. If he could only accept goods from one family, then the goods from the other family would have to remain in his hands. The reason why they had unscrupulously raised the price before was that this line of business had already been established in Fengzhou. The Lin family could only get their goods from these two stores. It was the same for them. Those big stores had their own channels. Without the Lin family, no one could buy their goods. It was not certain whether the goods could be sold in the future. If they could not get the silver today, they would not be able to complete the transaction with the foreign merchants tomorrow. They would have to watch a lot of silver slip away in front of their eyes. The loss would be immeasurable. Shopkeeper Ma stood up and sighed. The Ma family and the Su family have always advanced and retreated together. In that case, we have disturbed you today. Brother Su, let's go. Goodbye. Shopkeeper Su also stood up immediately. The two of them casually cupped their hands and turned to leave. Lin Wanru came over and looked out the door. She said, "They have left." Li Yi took another sip of tea and said, "They will be back soon." "Are you sure?" Lin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Li Yi smiled and said, "Wait and see." Although they called each other Brother Ma and Brother Su affectionately, it was just a fake brotherly relationship. When it came to the interests of each family, even blood brothers would turn against each other. The two families were currently short of money. Otherwise, they would not have come over to beg the Lin family to buy the goods. Now it was just a matter of who could not endure it first. The taste of the tea today is really different. It doesn't seem to be because of the water. Li Yi picked up the teacup and looked at her. Lin Wanru pointed to the teacup on the table and said, "This is red date and wolfberry tea, and this is my teacup." Li Yi was startled. He lifted the lid of the teacup and looked at it again. He slowly put down the teacup. The atmosphere in the room was a little awkward. Haha, red date and wolfberry tea is good. Red dates can nourish the body, nourish the blood and calm the nerves. Wolfberry nourishes the liver and eyesight. Drinking more of this tea can also improve anemia caused by menstruation. Cough, in short, drinking more is good. Li Yi coughed twice and stood up from the chair. He cupped his hands towards the door and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, please come in." Seeing Shopkeeper Ma walk in again, a trace of surprise finally appeared on Lin Wanru's face. A smile appeared on Shopkeeper Ma's face and he said, "Ha, Miss Lin, I thought about it. We can still talk about that batch of goods again." Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi. Li Yi took a step forward with a troubled expression on his face and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, to be honest, our Lin family does not lack jade materials this time. Instead, we are more interested in the Su family's gemstones. So, Shopkeeper Ma, I can only apologize." Shopkeeper Ma was startled. His expression suddenly changed and he immediately said, "Miss Lin, think about it again. Recently the market for jade has been very good. There is no harm in hoarding more goods." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Shopkeeper Ma. We still think 90%. Shopkeeper Ma looked at them and said, "I'll lower the price to 90%. 90% of the market price is fine." This time the amount of lioli was huge. He calculated the family's surplus money and scraped together some from here and there, but it was still far from enough. The value of this batch of goods was not small. It could be said that this batch of goods was his last hope. Li Yi frowned and shook his head. "This is really not a problem of money?" Shopkeeper Ma clenched his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "Give me another 5%. Can you give me another 5%? Money is really not important?" Shopkeeper Ma's eyes were already filled with tears. He clenched his teeth and said, 80%. 80%. I can't go any lower. Go outside and ask around. There is no such price anywhere." Lin Wanru looked at Shopkeeper Ma. She had been dealing with him for many years, but this was the first time she saw such an expression on his face. When she turned to look at Li Yi, the expression on her pretty face became somewhat complicated. What confidence did he have to be able to force Shopkeeper Ma to this state? "Humph, you said there is no such price anywhere." A cold snort came from outside the door. Shopkeeper Su strode in and said coldly, My Su family is willing to give you another 5% on top of the 80%. Surnamed Su, what is the meaning of this? Surnamed Ma, what is the meaning of sneaking back here? Aren't you? Li Yi looked at Lin Wanru and shrugged slightly. He was very pleased with his prediction. Lin Wanru glanced at him and sat down on a chair to the side. She took a sip of tea and looked at the two quarreling men in the hall. She sighed. At this moment she actually felt some sympathy for them. Suddenly, as if she had thought of something, she slowly turned her head and looked at the teacup in her hand. The expression on her pretty face froze and she didn't even swallow the tea in her mouth. You two calm down. Calm down. The atmosphere between the two people gradually became white-hot. When one of them was already looking at the chairs in the hall, Li Yi knew that he couldn't let them continue arguing like this. We're all doing business together. We see each other all the time. Don't hurt the harmony between us. He walked in between the two people and separated them. He said, isn't it because of the problem of the goods? I have a way to get the goods of both families to sell. What way? The two people immediately looked at him. How about we sell the goods of both families at 50% of the market price? Li Yi looked at them and encouraged, this way the Lin family will be able to buy all the goods of both families. Pooh, Lin Wanru's body leaned forward slightly. She almost spat out the mouthful of tea that she didn't know whether she had swallowed it or spat it out. When she saw Li Yi looking at her, she awkwardly covered her face with her sleeves and secretly wiped away the water at the corner of her mouth. When she raised her head, the expression on her face froze. She had finally swallowed that mouthful of tea in a panic. At this time, shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su finally recovered from the shock of that sentence. 50%? Why don't you just rob a bank? Shopkeeper Ma was the first to jump up and down. Shopkeeper Su quickly said, do you know what you are saying? 50%? How are we going to make a profit? Our Lin family is also in this business. Li Yi looked at the two of them and said, everyone knows how much profit there is in this business. You can still make a profit from 50%. As humans, don't be too greedy, that's for you. Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and said angrily, Brother Su, let's go. Shopkeeper Su's expression changed. He clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally relaxed them. He closed his eyes and said slowly, Brother Ma, you go back first. I want to have a good talk with this greedy young man. Chapter 697. Shopkeeper Ma stood rooted to the ground and looked at Shopkeeper Su in astonishment. You'll do it even if it's 50%? Shopkeeper Su stared into his eyes as if he could see through his thoughts. Are you not going to do it? Shopkeeper Ma's expression became a little unnatural after being seen through. He said in a low voice, 50%? I won't be earning much, it doesn't matter. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends. Seeing Lin Yong looking around outside, Li Yi waved at him and said, Brother Lin, come and send Shopkeeper Ma off. Shopkeeper Ma clenched his fists and loosened them. A dry smile quickly appeared on his face as he said, don't worry. Everything can be discussed. Without the Lin family, this batch of goods could not be disposed of in a short period of time. The business with the foreign merchants would also be ruined. That young man was right. If they sold the goods at half price, they would not suffer a loss. However, the profit would be pitifully small. Of course, if they rejected the Lin family, they would eventually make a move. However, they could not afford to wait any longer. The profit from this batch of goods was a small matter. Really was a big deal. They could not lose the big picture for the small. They had learned this principle decades ago. At this moment, while the two of them were feeling gloomy, they could not help but feel resentment towards the Bai family. If not for Bai Yu's persuasion, they would not have suddenly made things difficult for the Lin family and they would not be in this situation today. Shopkeeper Ma turned to look at Lin Wanru. There was a hint of pleading in his voice. Wanru, 50% is too little. We've worked for nothing these days. Why don't we add another 10%? Lin Wanru raised her head to look at Li Yi. She stood up from her chair but did not reply. Shopkeeper Ma closed his eyes and said anxiously, 5%. Even 5% is fine. After the two shopkeepers left, Lin Wanru's strange gaze made Li Yi feel a little guilty. He looked away and said, You don't know, but I'm actually very good at bargaining. Lin Wanru finally opened her mouth and asked, Why did they still agree when we lowered the price to such a low level? Li shook his head and said, How would I know? Maybe they found their conscience and felt guilty to the Lin family, so they wanted to make up for it and seek peace of mind. I heard that some people have some special hobbies. The more they lose in business, the more peace of mind they feel. The way Lin Wanru looked at him now was completely different from before. The final transaction price with the Ma family and the Su family was 55% of the market price, which was already an incredibly low price, exactly half of the price they offered 2 days ago. This was simply unimaginable in the past. Could even be said that the Lin family got a bargain for nothing. Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi again. It seemed that since he came here, the opportunities for the Lin family to get a bargain for nothing had increased. Seeing that her eyes had been circling around him, Li Yi felt uncomfortable all over. He stood up and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll leave first." "There's still a fish to deal with at home." Lin Wanru finally withdrew her gaze, stood up and said, "Thank you for today's matter. It's just helping to haggle. It's a small matter. I'm leaving." Li Yi waved his hand and walked out of the door. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru sat down again and stared blankly at the teacup on the table. She had been in charge of the Lin family for a few years and encountered many things in business. She had also accumulated some experience and means, but all the means were generally in line with the norm. Today, her horizons had been truly broadened. She had seen very clearly that when shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su had left, their eyes were glistening with tears. Every time this happened, she would start to wonder who the people she had picked up back then were. Shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su's decisiveness had actually slightly exceeded Li Yi's expectations. He had thought that it would be good enough if they could lower the price to 70%, but it seemed that he had underestimated the importance they placed on the deal tomorrow. A large batch of azure glass was going to be shipped to the Qi Kingdom. This time they were destined to suffer a loss. He felt a little guilty for setting them up twice in a row. When he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, he was surprised to find that the two men had not left yet. The young man named Baiyu was also at the entrance of Fragrant Forest Park. He must have bumped into the two men when he was about to enter. Shopkeeper Ma, shopkeeper Su. Baiyu was about to greet the two men, but they merely glanced at him coldly and walked straight past him. If not for Baiyu, they would not have suffered such a huge loss this time. They had accumulated a belly full of anger earlier, so naturally, they would not be in a good mood when they saw him again. Baiyu looked at them suspiciously. "The two of you, you're going to look for Miss Lin again?" Shopkeeper Ma glanced at Baiyu and sneered. "Nephew Bai, I'm afraid you're going to waste your efforts this time. You've been so attentive so many times, but in the end, haven't you ended up benefiting a pretty boy?" Shopkeeper Su shook his head. "Brother Ma, how can you say that? Nephew Bai doesn't know about this yet. Don't stab him in the chest again." Baiyu's expression changed. "What do you mean? What do you mean by, cheap pretty boy?" This time, the two men merely glanced at him mockingly before turning to leave, leaving Baiyu standing where he was. His expression began to fluctuate. Li Yi walked past him. He glanced at the two men's backs and curled his lips. What kind of people were they? Miss Lin had kindly accepted their goods so that they would not miss out on tomorrow's big business. Not only were they not grateful, they even dared to spread rumors about her. Were they even human? He had seen all of this. Lin Wanru had always been clean and virtuous. The man who had appeared by her side was the married man Lin Yong, who was in charge of her safety. Where did this pretty boy come from? Pretty boy? When he reached the entrance of his courtyard, Li Yi's footsteps paused. He turned around and looked in the direction that the two men had left. The trace of guilt in his heart instantly disappeared without a trace. "It was a pleasure working with you. It was a pleasure working with you." Shopkeeper Ma nodded to the foreign merchant and opened a large box placed in the center of the shop. After carefully inspecting the items inside, he waved his hand at the shop assistant behind him. The assistant immediately handed the box over to Shopkeeper Ma. The foreign merchant took the box and opened the lid. He saw that it was filled with neatly stacked gold nuggets. Shopkeeper Ma said, "These were exchanged from the bank this morning. Please check them." The foreign merchant placed the box to one side and bit each gold nugget. He waved his hand and said, "There's no need to check. We believe in the Ma family's reputation." Shopkeeper Ma looked at the foreign merchant and said, "I don't know if you have time. I'm holding a banquet at Agarwood Tower today." The foreign merchant waved his hand and said, "The Bai family and the Su family are still there. They're waiting for us." Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "In that case, I won't keep you." He casually pointed at an assistant and said, "Go and see these important guests off." When the few of them walked out of the shop, he opened the box again and saw a pile of sparkling and translucent glass inside. His face was filled with ecstasy. We're rich," Outside the shop, a shop assistant saw the foreign merchants out and said, "Gentlemen, I'll see you off here. Goodbye." Chapter 698. The box of gold was very conspicuous in the room. It was not that Li Yi had never seen so much money, but he had only seen such a scene of a whole box of gold in front of him in a TV series. When they were most short of money and manpower, they could only rely on selling jade pendants and poems to barely make a living. It was such a difficult period of time. It was only a month, but with so much money in front of them, their hearts were already calm. If it was someone else who saw so much gold, they would immediately become a nouveau riche. They would not be happy if they did not go out and spend hundreds of taels of silver. He closed the box and put it under the bed. When he walked out, he saw the second young lady of the Liu family slowly practicing Tai Chi in the courtyard. This was the improved version of Rui's Tai Chi. It focused more on actual combat, and the movements looked more beautiful. "Get ready, we'll go out in a while." Li looked at her and said, "What are we going to do?" Mississippi Liu continued her movements and asked without turning her head. "We've earned so much money. How can we not buy something to splurge on? Why don't we spend at least 1,000 taels of silver?" Li urged, "Hurry up, we'll leave after we finish eating." No matter in the past, present, or future, women couldn't resist the temptation of shopping. Even a fairy like Second Miss Liu, who didn't eat the food of the mortal world, would occasionally like to go shopping, even if she only bought a bunch of useless things. After finalizing the plan for today, when Li Yi was busy in the kitchen, Lin Yong came over, leaned on the door and asked, "Li brothers, do you have anything to do after dinner?" Li did not turn around and said, "I'm going out to buy something after dinner." Lin Yong clapped his hands and said, "Miss is going out in a while. She asked me to ask you guys if you want to go out together?" Since Lin Wanru refused to pay him the last time, he would always do something intentionally or unintentionally. For example, he would give Mississippi Liu a hairpin, a bracelet, or when he passed by a clothing store and saw a beautiful dress, he would also buy it for her, like a disguised compensation. This kind of thing happened every few days and Li Yi was used to it. Okay. Li Yi only hesitated for a moment and nodded in agreement. For such a long time, Second Miss Liu had been staying at home to recuperate. Occasionally she would go out with him. Other than him, the only other person she came into contact with was Lin Wanru, who would occasionally come to talk to him. Li Yi noticed that Lin Wanru did not seem to have many friends. Every day she would go to the Lin family and go to the shop. These two women did not like to talk, but during this time, they actually established a strange relationship. Of course, although they did not like to talk, there were different levels. When he was with Mississippi Liu, Lin Wanru talked more. It was actually a very tiring thing to go shopping with women because they did not know tiredness at all. When passing by the most famous rouge and powder shop in Fengzhou City, Mississippi Liu and Lin Wanru went in, and he and Lin Yong could only wait outside. Although there was no sign outside this shop that said, "Men are not allowed," generally men would choose to avoid it. Inside there were all women. The mixed smell of rouge and perfume made Li Yi very uncomfortable. Lin Yong squatted on the steps and asked, "Li brothers, such a small bottle of perfume actually dared to sell for 2 taels of silver, and these women still rushed to buy it. I really don't understand what they are thinking." Li Yi lowered his head and glanced at him. If a rough man like him could understand the mind of women, the sun would rise from the west. 2 taels of silver was nothing. A small bottle of limited edition Blue Enchantress in the capital of the Jing Kingdom cost 200 taels of silver, and a large group of people rushed to buy it. Even so, there was no market for it. Even if you had money, you could not buy it. The perfume in the Qi Kingdom was only bought from the capital. One bottle could be bought for 2 taels of silver, and it could not even recover the cost. If the perfume sold by these black-hearted purchasing agents was not diluted, his name would be written upside down. Next to the shop was a tea stall. At this time there were many customers in the tea stall, drinking tea and chatting. Li Yi was not in the mood to listen to them. He estimated that in at most half a month, they would be able to set off for their return. This time they did not enter the Qi Kingdom too deep. If they were fast they could reach Shuzhou in 2 days. Under his careful care, Mississippi Liu's body had recovered. The closer the day of their return, the more he looked forward to it. There were still some faint voices in his ears such as corrupt officials, first prince, for the country and the people, and so on. Lin Yong was a restless person. Li Yi did not pay attention to him, and the old man beside him would not talk to him either. He simply moved his butt and leaned to the side. "You don't say. This time those people have really done a lot of good things for Feng province. Corrupt officials should be arrested, the more the better. The more they arrest, the better the lives of the people will be. A young man dressed like a scholar glanced at him and said, "That's true, but nothing is absolute. It may not be a good thing to make such a big fuss and go to war. The whole Feng province and the neighboring provinces are in a mess, which is not a good thing for the people." Someone said, "Yes, which official is not corrupt? Big or small, the result is the same. These days there is no one in the county government to handle the case, and the bandits have become rampant. Every morning people go to the county government to report the case, and there is a long line at the door. They were all ordinary people drinking tea and chatting. Finally, Lin Yong found someone who was willing to talk to him. He simply sat beside the tea stall and chatted with the people. Li Yi leaned against a pillar, thinking about whether Rui would give birth to a boy or a girl, and what name he should give to the boy and what name he should give to the girl. Suddenly he heard a voice. "Young master, what do you think about the first prince's investigation of the corrupt officials in Feng province?" He turned around and saw an old man with gray hair standing up beside the tea stall. The old man looked at him and said with a smile. Li Yi looked at him from head to toe and shook his head slightly. He was holding a small book in his hand, which was probably a record of all kinds of rumors he had heard from the people of Feng province. The thin bamboo tube at his waist should be filled with writing brushes. Looking at his extremely familiar appearance, he could catch anyone on the street and ask them about their opinions on the current affairs of the court. The censors of the Jing kingdom and the Qi kingdom were all the same. They had a few new tricks up their sleeves. The way they handled things was also simple and crude. Even if they were a little tactful, it would not be easy for people to guess their identity. One could not speak carelessly in front of the imperial censors. These people were all hearsay memorials, which meant that as long as they heard some news, no matter whether it was true or false, they could openly talk about it. If Li Yi said that the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi, and the sage of poetry, Zhao Xiuwen, had some kind of shady deal for a long time and it was heard by one of the censors, it would not take long before everyone knew that the two of them liked men. They did not have to take responsibility for their words. This was the privilege of the censors. How else can I look at it? I'm standing in front of my house. Li Yi looked at him and said, "These few days the soldiers have been arresting people outside every day. It's very lively." The old man had a smile on his face. He was about to ask some questions but his mouth opened halfway. He did not know what he wanted to ask. Chapter 699. I'm asking for your opinion on this matter, not where you stand, nor am I asking if you're enjoying the commotion. Zheng Yuanliang had been assigned to the Imperial Censorate a few years ago to oversee the military, economy, and production in Feng province and neighboring provinces. He would report to the capital every 6 months. Feng province was governed by the third prince. The people lived in peace and the politics were clean. Although there were occasional crimes committed, they were almost negligible. These crimes were unavoidable even in the capital. Other than assigning the censors to various places, the Imperial Censorate would also conduct a large-scale operation every year. They would send out a large number of censors to patrol the provinces and counties. They were responsible for investigating and impeaching officials. This large-scale operation by the Imperial Censorate was normal, but it was also abnormal. This was because there had never been a time when so many officials had failed in the examination of any province. The severity of the examination was so severe that even the censor, who could not bear to offend anyone, could not stand it. Because of this matter, Feng province and the neighboring provinces were in a state of chaos. The officials were in a state of panic, and they were not in the mood for official business. Naturally, there would be some chaos among the people. This made him wonder if the first prince was using this opportunity to take revenge on a personal grudge and deliberately drag Feng province into this mess. Based on his relationship with the third prince and his position, it was not strange at all that he would do such a thing. If this was really the case, he could not just stand by and watch. Of course, before that, he had to fully understand the public opinion. He had almost walked through the entire street, and everything was going smoothly until he met this young man who interrupted his train of thought. Opinion? Li looked at him and said, "I'm just a commoner. How dare I discuss the affairs of the state?" Zheng Yuanliang frowned and looked at him. The affairs of the state are closely related to everyone. Whether you're in the court or in the marketplace, what's the difference? As an ordinary citizen of the Qi kingdom, I'm just asking for your opinion on this matter. Ordinary citizen? Don't joke around. How can an official be the same as an ordinary citizen? Li looked left and right, then looked at him and asked, "Where are your people hiding? Are you going to arrest me as soon as I speak? Let me tell you, I won't fall for such a clumsy trap." The censor stared blankly at the young man in front of him. He opened his mouth but was speechless. After a long time he spoke again. "The government has to act according to the law when arresting people. When have they ever used such a ridiculous reason? If that's the case, then I'd like to ask you, which government office is so bold? This official?" Li looked at him with an expression as if he had expected this to be the case. "And you said you're not an official?" The old man silently retreated to the side of the tea stall and didn't say another word. Li leaned back against the pillar and shook his head. He had already thought of a satisfactory name, but after being disturbed by the old man, he couldn't think of it. Brother Lin Yong, come in quickly." At some point, the voice of Lin Wanru's maidservant came from inside the shop. Lin Yong, who was sitting next to the tea stall, turned his head. After a moment of shock, a surprised expression appeared on his face. He asked, "Was Xiu calling me just now?" As soon as he finished speaking, the young maidservant's voice suddenly became shrill. "What do you want?" She was the one who made the first move. Lin Yong's expression changed. He jumped up from his seat and immediately rushed into the shop. Li looked at him in surprise and followed him in. Inside the shop, a few men surrounded Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru. On the ground, a slightly good-looking woman sat on the ground in a very indecent position. At this moment she was hugging the thigh of another young man and complaining, "Young master, they bullied me. You have to stand up for me." The young man patted the woman's hand and helped her up. He said, "Don't cry. Don't worry, I will stand up for you." Lin Yong rushed to Lin Wanru's side and asked, "Miss, what happened? Are you all right?" Lin Wanru looked back at Mississippi Lu and just shook her head slightly. The maidservant named Xiu said hurriedly, "Just now Miss had already bought that perfume. That lady said she saw it first and insisted that Miss give it to her. Miss only said a few words to her and she wanted to slap Mississippi. Then Miss Lu grabbed her wrist and gently shook it. She sat on the ground by herself." At this time, the young man came over and looked at Mississippi Lu. After a moment of shock, he said slowly, "Let's not talk about who saw the perfume first. I'm afraid it's a bit too much for this lady to hit someone without saying a word." Xiu said unhappily, "It was you who started it." Lin Wanru patted her on the shoulder and walked out. She looked at the young man and said, "We are very sorry about what happened to this lady. However, everyone in the shop saw clearly that it was the lady who started it. Even if we report this to the authorities, we are still in the right. Why don't we each take a step back and let this matter end here? What do you think?" The young man looked at her face for a long time and then looked at the other woman behind her. He suddenly smiled and said, "Miss, you are really reasonable. This is a small matter. It's not good to make a big deal out of it. We were also in the wrong just now. Let me buy this bottle of perfume as an apology, okay? By the way, I still don't know your name." The woman behind the young man had a smug look on her face. Suddenly things took a turn. Mr. Dujin, who had promised to stand up for him, suddenly changed his mind. Not only did he not intend to pursue the matter, but he also wanted to give the perfume that he liked to that woman. "Mister?" She pulled the young man's shoulder. The young man turned his head and looked at her coldly. The woman felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her head. She could no longer say anything. "I appreciate Mr. Dujin's kindness." Lin Wanru took a step back and looked at Mississippi Lu. She said, "Let's go." "Miss, please wait." The young man took a step forward and reached out his hand to stop them. However, his shoulder was pressed against by someone's palm. Li used his other hand to point at the woman with heavy makeup who was standing there in a daze. He said, "Your lady is over there." "Who are you?" The young man frowned and asked. Li tilted his head and looked at Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru. He then turned his head to look at the young man and asked, "What do you think?" The young man was stunned for a moment. He seemed to have thought of something and a look of pity appeared on his face. "What a pity?" The expression on his face became one of disgust. He looked at Li and said coldly, "I hate it when people touch my shoulder." Li patted his other shoulder and said, "This is an illness. It needs to be treated." Chapter 700. In many cases, a beauty could be equated with a source of calamity. On the streets of the 21st century, ordinary people couldn't help but take a few more glances when encountering a beautiful woman. They would be bold and shameless enough to approach her and ask for her WeChat number. If they took a liking to each other, they would go further. This was a very normal thing. This kind of thing had been like this since ancient times. As time went on, some aspects would become more and more advanced while others would regress. In the conservative ancient times, this kind of thing was much more open than it was in the future. Ordinary people could only take a few more glances when they saw a beautiful woman, but rich and powerful young masters wouldn't spend a lot of time to pick up girls. They would just snatch them if they didn't agree. Otherwise, where did the classic scenes in dramas and novels come from? From a philosophical point of view, any consciousness was essentially a reflection of objective existence. It could be found in reality and couldn't be created out of thin air. Zhen Guanxi forcefully married Jin Suilian, Gao Ye forcefully snatched Lady Lin. In the water margin alone, there were more than 10 cases of women being forcefully snatched. Art came from life but was higher than life. When Mr. Shi wrote these stories, he didn't create them out of thin air. Being in a foreign country, Li Yi didn't want to cause trouble. However, seeing such a playboy touching Lin Wanru, he couldn't pretend that he didn't see it and act like he didn't. There was no need to be afraid at all. Sue's head was standing at the door. Was there a need to be afraid? I said that I hate men touching my shoulders the most. The smile on the young man's face disappeared. He took 2 steps back and ordered the men, break both of his hands. I'll see who dares. Lin Yong roared and stood in front of Li Yi. The men who looked like guards walked over to them. The woman in the shop had long run out in fear, but it attracted the pedestrians on the street to stop and watch. The 2 young men strolled on the street. If one were to observe carefully, they would notice that the people around them would look around vigilantly from time to time, forming an airtight encirclement around the 2 of them. Zhao Jing looked around and said, "Brother, these censors have been stirring up trouble in Feng province recently. You won't blame me, right?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "This is the duty of the imperial censors. Imperial brother worries too much." As the 2 of them walked along, they saw some chaos among the commoners. Zhao Zheng was very pleased with himself, but when he turned his head, he saw that Zhao Yi's face was expressionless. There was a hint of anger, but it was gone in a flash. "My heart is comforted that royal younger brother understands." Zhao Jing nodded his head and said, "Imperial brother has good intentions." Although Feng province looks stable on the surface, there are still many hidden dangers inside. If we don't punish these parasites, I'm afraid they will become a big problem in the future. Zhao Yi nodded but did not speak again. The problems that had been exposed in Fengzhou were far beyond his expectations. He thought that there would always be some vermin, but he did not expect there to be so many of them. The people from King Feng's mansion had been following those censors all the time. It was impossible for them to be biased. Because of this, he really noticed some things. Feng province was under his watch, but it was already like this. How bad would the other places in the Qi kingdom be? If it was not treated, the country would be destroyed in the long run. This was the historical experience that he learned from the history books. It was inevitable, but it could last for a long time. If it was treated seriously, some uncontrollable things would happen in a short period of time. Some news from the Jing kingdom had just been placed on his desk. The investigation of officials in the capital city of the Jing kingdom involved a lot of people. It was very similar to the current Feng province. However, even the wise Emperor Jing could not solve the problem. After the chaos, there was no follow-up. Even the ruler of a country could not control it. It was obvious what happened to the eldest prince. In addition, there were some things that were a little difficult for him to understand. The scene was so similar and the method was so similar. The secret agents of the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom tried their best, but they could not learn the legendary debit and credit method. How did it spread to the Qi kingdom? On the piece of paper that Money God of Fortune picked up, the words borrow and loan were clearly written. The Jing kingdom's arithmetic academy, the debit and credit method, the director Li Yi, the amazing poetry, the dragon jade pendant. These things were intertwined. In his heart, he was sure that the person he wanted to see was in the Qi kingdom, in the city of Feng province, in a place that he could not see. "Be careful, young master." A shout suddenly came from beside him. Zhao Yi raised his head and saw a huge object flying out from the shop next to him. Immediately, one of the shadow guards flew up, stepped on the object and used his weapon to block it. Several men with their arms crossed ran out of the shop in a hurry. Then, several figures came out from inside. Zhao Yi looked over subconsciously. The one walking in front was a young man. His eyes stayed on the young man's face for a moment and then moved away. These things would be handled by someone. When he was about to leave, a voice came from beside him. What's going on? Zhao Jing walked to the man who was stepped on by the guard and asked with a frown. Cousin brother, save me. The young man raised his head and immediately cried out when he saw Zhao Zheng. Cousin brother? Seeing the scene in front of him, Li Yi was also stunned. He whispered, what's going on? At this moment the third prince Zhao Yi was shocked. He suddenly turned his head and looked somewhere. That guy just now actually had companions and it seemed like there were quite a few of them. Li Yi glanced around and when he saw a handsome young man in the crowd, his movements paused for a moment. Then, he continued to look at him as if nothing had happened. Zhao Yi's eyes stayed in one place for a long time before he moved away. There was a slightly disappointed expression on his face. What's the matter with you? The young man on the ground had been helped up. Zhao Jing looked at him and asked with a frown. The young man rubbed a certain part of his body and said while gritting his teeth, This is a group of thugs. Cousin brother, I want to report them to the officials to arrest them. Zhao Jing looked in the direction he was pointing at. When he saw the two women he roughly understood what was going on. Before he could say anything, another figure walked over from the side. The old man called Jing Yuanliang walked over and cupped his hands in salute. When he was about to bow, Zhao Jing waved his hand and said, Dispense with the formalities. Don't reveal our identities. Zhao Jing frowned again. He knew very well what kind of person this cousin brother of his was. This journey was supposed to bring him to gain more experience, but he had been womanizing and had caused a lot of trouble. He could show himself in other places but this was Feng province. Any mistake would be used against him. For example, Zhao Yi and the censor in front of him, who had not been very willing to cooperate with him before. He looked at the young man and said, Be obedient and go back to the relay station. After being glared at by him, the young man immediately retracted his head and said no more. Seeing Zhao Yi look over, Zhao Jing shook his head and said, It's just a misunderstanding. Let's go. The third prince Zhao Yi nodded. He looked in a certain direction again and turned to leave. Are you all right? Lin Wanru walked up to him and asked with concern when she saw that the people had left quickly. She was still a little shocked when she recalled the scene when he had thrown the man away with one hand. It was really hard to imagine that he looked so weak, but he had such terrifying strength. I'm fine. Li shook his head and said, Let's go. He was still a little surprised. They had not seen each other for a long time, but he had recognized the young man at first glance. The young man who had been looking at him for a long time was the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi. The man beside him who had whispered to the censor not to reveal their identities should be the first prince of the Qi kingdom. Chapter 701. Although there were some unpleasant interludes during this shopping trip, fortunately, they were all resolved satisfactorily. Lin Wanru gave the bottle of perfume to second Miss Lu. Beside her, Lin Yong muttered in a low voice. This 2 taels of perfume was extremely expensive. His wife had been talking about it for half a month. Yesterday he really couldn't stand it anymore so he bought her a bottle. Lin Yong would feel uncomfortable if he didn't talk to others. He just needed to listen. Thinking of something, Li Yi turned to look at Lin Wanru and asked, Isn't the conflict between the first prince and the third prince irreconcilable? It doesn't seem to be the case. Are the rumors wrong? Lin Wanru looked at him and asked doubtfully, When did you see the first prince and the third prince? Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, Just now, the young man who passed by the perfume shop was the third prince. Didn't you see him? Lin Wanru was startled and asked in surprise, That was the third prince? Li Yi was even more surprised, You don't know the third prince? Lin Wanru looked at him with a hint of doubt on her face and asked, Although the third prince has been in Feng province for more than 10 years, he has never officially shown his face. Even some officials in Feng province city don't know what he looks like. How do you know him? Li Yi was startled, then looked at him and asked doubtfully, He has never shown his face? No. Li Yi thought for a moment and said with a smile, The third prince went to the capital of the Jing kingdom last time. I saw him from afar and he looked very similar to the young man just now. However, it might not be him. Does the third prince have a twin brother? Lin Wanru shook her head and said, I've never heard of it. Then I might have seen wrongly. Li Yi turned his head and looked around. He pointed to a shop not far away and said, There's a cloth shop over there. Let's go and see if they have any new fabrics. The weather is good today and the clouds in the sky are so white. It's a good time to buy 2 bolts of fabric. The weather is not bad, the clouds are so white. Buying fabric? Looking at Li Yi, who was striding forward, Lin Yong scratched his head and asked in surprise, "Does this matter?" "Let's go," Lin Wanru said in a low voice. When she raised her head to look at the figure in front of her again, a trace of doubt appeared in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. She shook her head and strode forward. One should not be afraid of a thief stealing, but one should be afraid of a thief remembering. Of all people, it had to be Lin Wanru and Mississippi Lu. This was the Qi Kingdom, and there were many things that he could not directly intervene in. Since he already knew that Lin Wanru would face some unknown dangers in the future, he could not pretend that he did not know and just walk away. The first prince, right? Very busy recently, right? Then continue to be busy. It was good to be busy, to be busy. Li Yi stood at the door of a shop and rubbed the space between his brows out of habit. As he was worrying about the feudal construction of the Qi Kingdom, an old man came up to him and asked in a low voice, "Young master, may I disturb you for a moment?" Li Yi looked at the old man. He was dressed in Confucian robes and had a small book in his hand. A bamboo tube hung at his waist. Other than his appearance, he looked different from the old man just now. It was as if he had come from the same production line. Yi Futian sighed and asked, "What is it?" The old man looked at him and said, "The first prince has led a group of imperial censors to investigate the corrupt officials in Feng province. There has been quite a commotion these days. I wonder what this young master thinks of this matter?" He went straight to the point. It was the same straightforwardness, the same simple brutality. Li Yi took a deep breath and asked, "Can I curse?" The old man glanced at him and said with a frown, "How can a scholar speak dirty words?" "Then I have no opinion." Li Yi waved his hand and pointed somewhere. He said, "There is a tea stall in front. There are many people there. Do you want to go there and ask?" Lin Yong walked in front with a lot of things in his arms. Li Yi and the sloppy old man followed behind Mississippi Lu and Lin Wanru. Feng province was not peaceful these days. It was unexpected to meet 2 imperial censors in plain clothes on the same street. From the analysis of the situation, the relationship between the first prince and the third prince was far from good enough for them to go shopping together. On the surface, it was a fake brotherly love. Who knew how they would stab each other in the back? Li Yi turned to look at the sloppy old man and asked, "Su, do you have anything to do tonight?" The sloppy old man glanced at him and shook his head. "No." Li Yi nodded and said, "That's good. Your body has not recovered yet. You need to take care of your injuries. If there is nothing important, try not to make trouble." The sloppy old man looked at him and asked, "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "No." "Really?" The sloppy old man asked doubtfully. "I really didn't." Li Yi nodded. "In the courtyard next to Fragrant Forest Garden. Be careful." Li Yi patted the sloppy old man's shoulder, put an envelope in his hand and said. The sloppy old man nodded. When he turned around, he asked, "Do you need me to bring back the head of the first prince?" "No, no." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, "It's good that the thing has been delivered. You don't need to bring anything back." After all, this was the Qi Kingdom. If the first prince's head was cut off in someone else's territory, wouldn't the entire Fengzhou city be turned upside down? At that time, no one would be able to leave the city. The entire Fengzhou city would be turned upside down. No matter how powerful a grandmaster was, he would not be able to take him and Mississippi Lu away. No, forget it. When the sloppy old man's voice rang out, he had already disappeared from the courtyard. Mississippi Lu walked out of the room and asked, "Who were you talking to outside just now?" "No one." Li Yi waved his hand and walked into the room. As he walked, he said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. You have to go to work tomorrow." In a heavily guarded courier station in Fengzhou City. "Your Highness, the name list of all the people found these days is all here." An official put a thin booklet on the table. After saluting, he slowly left. Zhao Jing picked up the booklet and casually flipped through it while pacing in the room. 53 people. He looked at a certain number written on the booklet and a smile appeared on his face. Over the past few days, a total of 53 officials in Fengzhou had been found to have committed serious corruption. Not to mention how many of Zhao Yi's trusted subordinates were among them. How many of his people could be placed in these 53 positions if he fought for them? In this way, he would have more control over Fengzhou. In the future, no matter what Zhao Yi did, he would be able to keep an eye on it. If he could dig deeper into this matter and strike while the iron was hot, he could completely replace Zhao Yi and become the ruler of Fengzhou and the neighboring provinces. In that case, Zhao Yi would be like an eagle without wings. How could he fight against him? For him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whether or not he could grasp it and change the impression that the people and the court officials had of him and Zhao Yi, the following days were very important. He had to produce more results. After reading the booklet from beginning to end, Zhao Jing nodded and murmured, "Not bad. The wine is good, but the chicken is too old." A voice suddenly came from the room. "Who is it?" Zhao Zheng's expression changed. He suddenly turned his head and saw an old man with messy hair and a black cloth covering his face sitting at the table. The old man pointed at a dish on the table with his chopsticks and shook his head. "Who made this poached chicken? It's such a waste of good ingredients. He deserves to be beaten." Chapter 702. Who are you? How did you get in here? Zhao Jing asked coldly as he slowly moved towards the door, a look of extreme vigilance on his face. There were 500 guards outside the relay station, and all around the room were his personal guards. He really could not figure out how this old man managed to break through the guards and get in here. The masked old man swung his hand, and the chopsticks in his hand shot out. They brushed past Zhao Zheng's eyes and sank deep into the doorframe. He looked at this prince of the Qi kingdom and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Looking at the two easily broken jade chopsticks, which were inserted about an inch above the doorframe, Zhao Jing knew that it was no longer important how the other party managed to get into this courtyard under the heavy guards. What was important was that if the jade chopsticks could be inserted into the doorframe, they could naturally be inserted into Zhao Zheng's head, heart, or any other place. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, they had regained their indifference. He walked over and cupped his hands towards the masked old man, saying, "I was impolite just now. May I know what senior has come to visit me in the middle of the night?" Since the other party had such terrifying strength, but did not kill him immediately, it meant that the old man was not here to kill him. In that case, everything could be discussed. The masked old man took a sip of wine, then looked at him and asked, "I heard that you've obtained a wonderful method these days, and you're using that method to investigate cases and catch corrupt officials?" Zhao Jing raised his eyebrows. For a moment he did not know the old man's true intentions. Was there someone on the list that he cared about, or was it because this matter had touched upon some of his interests? He looked at the old man and said tentatively, "If this matter has offended Senior, I apologize to Senior. If Senior has any requests, Zhao Jing will certainly do his best to satisfy them." Smack. The masked old man suddenly slammed the table, making a crisp sound. It also made Zhao Jing's heart tighten. The masked old man raised his eyebrows, looked at him, and said coldly, "Do you know that the method is called the debit bookkeeping method, which is a secret that my sect has spent 30 years to develop? But it was stolen by a traitor. When I chased after the traitor, I found that this thing was actually obtained by you. Tell me, where did you get this method?" Hearing this, Zhao Zheng was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately realized something. As expected, the god of wealth was just a lowly merchant. How could he come up with such a wonderful method? He must have gotten it from somewhere, taken it for himself, and then claimed credit in front of him. How could such a clumsy method be hidden from him? Zhao Jing seemed to have seen through everything. He cupped his fists at the old man and said apologetically, "Senior, I'm really sorry. I really didn't know. This is a secret of your sect. Please forgive me, Senior. I'm willing to make it up to you. Is there anything I can do for Senior?" At this moment, what he was most afraid of was that this old man's martial arts was extraordinarily high, but he was stubborn and had no interest in money or power. As long as the old man had a request, he would be safe. "Shut up. I'm not a man who covets power and wealth. I know that you're the first prince of the Qi kingdom, but you can't humiliate me like this." "Smack," said the masked old man coldly. He slammed his palm on the table again, causing Zhao Zheng's heart to skip a beat. He subconsciously wanted to shout out loud, "Here." The masked old man took out something wrapped in black cloth from his bosom and handed it to Zhao Zheng. Zhao Zheng's mouth was half open, and his back was wet with cold sweat. His heart was tangled up, but when he saw that the old man only handed him something, he was stunned for a moment. After a long time, seeing that the old man really had no intention of killing him, he finally relaxed. He asked carefully, "Senior, what is this?" The masked old man said slowly, "My whole sect has devoted 30 years of study to develop this secret method. My purpose was to present it to the imperial court, to eliminate the corrupt officials of the Qi kingdom, and to restore peace to the world. However, I didn't expect that there would be a traitor in my sect, and the secret method was stolen. I was worried that the method would be used by other countries, so I chased after them. I heard about this just as I arrived in Fengzhou. Zhao Zheng was stunned again and asked, "Senior, you mean? You did a good job. You eliminated the corrupt officials without any leniency. What you did was for the good of the country and the people. I've seen it all these days." The masked old man stood up, patted him on the shoulder and said, "What the traitor stole was only an incomplete part of the first part of the secret method. What's inside is the entire secret method. I'm passing it to you now in the hope that you will keep your original heart in the future. Don't give up because of those with ulterior motives, and don't disappoint me and my sect. If the corrupt officials are not eliminated, the people will never have a day of peace." The turn of events was too sudden, and Zhao Zheng could not react for a moment. The assassin who attacked the courier station at night suddenly became selfless for the country and the people. He needed time to digest this. "Thank you, Senior. Zhao Zheng will not let you down." Very quickly, Zhao Zheng understood that he had hit the jackpot today. If a mere fragment of the first half could have such an effect, wouldn't he be able to move unhindered in the imperial court if he could obtain the complete first and second half? Although he did not know which sect this old man belonged to, the person who could research this method must not be ordinary. Maybe there was something more powerful in it. If he could get it. The masked old man said in a deep voice, "This is the complete debit and credit bookkeeping method, as well as a wonderful way to govern the country and fill the national treasury. You must take good care of it and remember not to spread it. If other countries get it, the consequences will be unimaginable." Zhao Zheng was delighted, but a solemn expression appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "Senior, don't worry. After looking at it, I will completely burn it without leaving a trace." The old man nodded and asked, "Now tell me, where did you get this method?" Zhao Zheng replied without hesitation, "Fortune god of money, the fortune god of money in Fengzhou. This method was given by him." "Fortune god of money?" The masked old man nodded and said, "The thing has been delivered. I will leave now. I hope you won't let me down." Zhao Zheng hurriedly said, "I still don't know your name, Senior. You have done a great service to the Qi Kingdom. Please leave your name. In the future, Zhao Zheng will write a book and erect a monument for you so that the people can admire you." "Aha, I have done my best for the country. How can I, Su Tian, be a vulgar person who does good deeds and leaves my name everywhere?" The old man laughed and said, "Farewell, we will never meet again." He waved his sleeves and the door opened. Zhao Zheng blinked, but there was no one at the door. Zhao Zheng walked out quickly. A guard immediately came over and bowed. "Your Highness, what can I do for you?" Zhao Zheng looked at them and asked, "Did you see anyone leave my room?" The two guards looked at each other and shook their heads. They said, "No, only your Highness." "All right, there is nothing else. You can leave. In a quarter of an hour, tell the guard in charge of the relay station to see me." Zhao Zheng waved at them and went back to his room. When he walked inside, he saw an item wrapped in black cloth on the table. There was an unconcealable fire in his eyes. Chapter 703. Inside the room, Zhao Zheng slowly opened up the black cloth, revealing the item inside. It was a bright yellow piece of silk. It looked a little old and should have been around for quite some time. There were some words on the silk. Zhao Zheng slowly unfolded it. It was written in an upright script that he had never seen before. Just by looking at the handwriting, he could tell that the person who wrote on the silk was not an ordinary person. The words were not on paper but on the silk. It was really puzzling. However, it also made him pay more attention to the content on the silk. Zhao Zheng carefully moved the oil lamp on the table closer to him. He looked at the piece of silk with rapt attention. His face sometimes showed doubt, sometimes he showed a look of understanding. Sometimes he frowned and sometimes he relaxed. Finally, he slowly stood up and opened the door. He said, "Invite the censors in. Your Highness, a few of the officials are already asleep. Wake them all up." Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Tell them that I have something important to discuss with them." "Yes, Your Highness." The guard quickly got up and ran away. Not long after, many of the lights in the relay station that had been out for a long time were lit up again. "May I know why Your Highness has summoned us so late at night?" Nearly 10 censors rushed over. Some of them didn't even have time to tidy up their robes. They tied up their sleeves and asked. Zhao Zheng looked at the burnt silk in the bowl on the table. He turned around and said, "For the past few days I have been working day and night. I have made some improvements to the debit and credit method. I have added and deleted several times to make it more convenient to use. From tomorrow onwards, you will use this new method to investigate." He handed a piece of paper over to the censor in front of him. After the censor received the paper, he saw the crisscrossed lines of rules and regulations drawn on it. His expression was one of astonishment. After staring at it for a long time, a look of surprise and joy appeared on his face. He looked at Zhao Zheng and praised, "Your Highness is indeed a genius. With this, when we check the accounts, all the items will be clear and concise. It will greatly increase the speed of our work and provide us with great convenience." Hearing the censor's words, Zhao Zheng nodded slightly. He didn't know where the nameless old man came from. He naturally wouldn't believe what he said. At that time he only wanted to save his life. There was an element of hypocrisy in it. But when he saw the first page of the silk, his thoughts immediately changed. The method recorded on it was exactly the same as the censor's, but it was more detailed. The god of wealth didn't tell them some of the methods. It was obvious that the method they used was derived from the old man's. But it was not complete. At this point he believed most of the old man's words. The censors were supervising the prefectures and assessing the officials. Some officials were corrupt, some were ineffective, and some had flaws in their style of work. There would always be some small problems in all aspects, but they were harmless and difficult to measure. If they weren't punished, it would be conniving and they didn't know how to punish them. If they could all be converted into silver, it would be much more convenient. However, if this was the case, wouldn't it make some officials fearless and worsen their corruption? This was like walking on a steel cable, and below it was a cliff tens of thousands of feet high. If they could safely walk over, they would be greeted with cheers, but if there was the slightest mistake, they would be consigned to eternal damnation, and their bones would be crushed. Before this, there had never been a dynasty that had implemented such a method. Whether it would be applauded or crushed, they could only try it themselves. One of the censors thought about it, and a conflicted expression appeared on his face. He stood up and said, "Your Highness?" Zhao Zheng looked at him coldly and asked, "Censor Shin, do you have any objections?" Seeing the great prince's expression, everyone's heart shook. They knew that this time, the great prince had most likely hardened his heart to implement this method. The problem of the national treasury had always been the emperor's sore point. If there was a way to solve this problem once and for all, there would be no more worries. Even if they had to pay a small price, they believed that the emperor would not refuse. For the great prince, this was also a rare opportunity. Once he could personally take charge of this matter, in the future, all the officials in the world would have to act according to his wishes. On one hand he could receive the emperor's attention and on the other he could establish his prestige in front of the officials. If someone disagreed with him on this matter, the outcome would be very tragic. Censor Shin opened his mouth and swallowed the words he was about to say. He bowed and said, "Your Highness is wise." One of the censors asked, "Your Highness, does this method have a name?" Zhao Jing thought about it and said, "Let's call it silver for discussing crimes." Inside the room, Li Yi looked at the old bedsheet that was missing a piece and blew out the oil lamp. Today he had bought 2 rolls of cloth. Tomorrow he would cut out a new bedsheet. The bedsheet was missing a piece and it looked really awkward. Chapter 704. That night at King Feng's residence. "Your Highness, we can't let them go on like this. The officials of several provinces are complaining, and the people's grievances are increasing every day. I'm afraid that Feng province, which we have been managing for so long, will be destroyed in their hands." The person who spoke was the provincial governor of Feng province. He was pacing back and forth anxiously in his room. According to the plan, the first prince's actions in Feng province should have reached the capital by now and caused a huge reaction. If they were to hurry, there should be a reply after such a long time. However, the reply didn't come. The increasingly unscrupulous imperial censors had caused an impact that couldn't be ignored in Feng province. In the face of the first prince's deliberate targeting, if they continued to sit back and do nothing, there would be some irreparable losses. Zhao Yi heard this and frowned slightly. Although the other party's actions in Feng province were related to the personal grudge between him and the first prince, it was an official matter on the surface. If he obstructed them, he would definitely become a laughingstock. The imperial censors had always been merciless and couldn't be ignored. He couldn't advance or retreat. A helpless expression appeared on Zhao Yi's face as he muttered, "Brotherly, brotherly, you have given me a difficult problem this time." The provincial governor of Feng province looked at him and asked doubtfully, "What did your highness say?" "Nothing." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Provincial Governor Zhou, you can go back first. I have my own arrangements for this matter." The middle-aged man nodded and left the room. Zhao Yi walked over. Just as she was about to close the door, she suddenly heard a sound like silk tearing, followed by a bang. He turned his head and saw a dagger inserted straight into the door all the way to the hilt. A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Yi's face. He took out a handkerchief from his bosom and held the hilt. He didn't use much strength and easily pulled out the dagger. It was obvious that it was an extremely sharp weapon. "Who is it?" Zhao Yi stood at the door and looked into the courtyard. He asked loudly. There was no response for a long time. He waved at the guard who was walking towards him and walked into the room. He took out a few pieces of paper from the dagger and carefully placed the dagger on the table. He didn't know who could sneak into the prince's mansion and deliver a message with a dagger, but the content of the message should be very important. Silver? But when he saw the first sentence written on the paper, he frowned. As time passed, the expression on his face first became solemn, then puzzled, surprised, and finally stunned. What was written on it was a system called Silver for Trial of Crimes. As the name suggested, the content of this system was to pay for crimes with money. Depending on the severity of the crime committed by the officials, they would be exempted from certain punishments by a certain amount of silver. Although this law could solve the country's financial problems in a short period of time, in the long run, corruption would inevitably spread to the point where it could not be suppressed, and the country would not be far from destruction. What was strange was that these pieces of paper described in detail the evils of the silver for trial of crimes. They quoted scriptures and discussed the major crimes committed by the silver for trial of crimes. For example, using money to pay for crimes would make the officials who paid the silver for trial of crimes even more unbridled and fearless, and the officials would become more corrupt. With the silver for trial of crimes, the officials would exploit the people even more, and the country would be in turmoil. Finally, using money to pay for crimes would not be pursued, and the law would become useless. The law would collapse and the country would perish. Of course, more importantly, it was clearly written on the paper that the eldest prince was going to vigorously implement the silver for trial of crimes system. This was simply encouraging evil practices and promoting unhealthy practices, with the intention of destroying the Qi kingdom. The person who wrote this letter was originally an expert who wandered around the world. He was unwilling to see the state of Qi destroyed in the hands of such a person. Thus, he sent a letter with a dagger to expose the matter. He hoped that he could announce this matter to the world and let everyone see the ugly face of the first prince. Zhao Yi put down the letter and sat by the table. His right index finger tapped on the surface of the table. If this matter was true and the eldest prince really wanted to implement this method of destroying the country, then he would have a good reason to do so. He would not need to care about the censors and the opinions of the people in the capital, and the siege of Feng province would be resolved. The problem was who had sent this letter. How did he find out about this matter, and how did he enter the prince's residence? No matter what, he would not believe the words of a wandering expert. Who could it be? Zhao Yi's index finger tapped on the surface of the table a little faster as he murmured. At this moment there was a knock on the door. Zhao Yi got up and walked to the door. He asked, "What is it?" "I forgot something." An old voice rang out and the door bolt broke. Zhao Yi saw a masked old man with white hair walk in. He walked to the side of the table and put away the dagger. When he walked out of the door, he glanced at Zhao Yi and casually stuck the other dagger into the door. He said, "It's a little dark, so I stuck it in the wrong place. Sorry." Zhao Yi watched him walk into the courtyard. With a leap, he flew up to the roof and completely disappeared into the night. "There's an assassin. There's an assassin." Panicked footsteps could be heard nearby. Countless figures ran over. "Your Highness, is your Highness all right? Where did the assassin go? Catch the assassin. Catch the assassin." A moment later, Zhao Yi dismissed the crowd and asked, "Is anyone injured?" One person immediately replied, "Your Highness, only a few guards were knocked unconscious. No one was injured." Zhao Yi nodded and looked at the dagger on the door. He walked over, grabbed the handle and exerted a little force. The dagger did not move at all. Thinking of how the old man had cut the dagger like it was tofu, Zhao Yi asked, "Did anything happen at the relay station tonight?" Someone walked up and bowed, saying, "Your Highness, the first prince gathered everyone in the middle of the night. He seemed to be discussing something important. Zhao Yi nodded and pulled out the dagger with all his might. Then he walked into the house. In the future, double the number of people in this area. Someone bowed, as you command. At the same time, at the Feng Province relay station, a few people knelt down in the corridor, trembling with fear. Zhao Jing pointed at them and said coldly, "It's useless. You don't even know that someone has barged in. I have raised a bunch of trash for nothing." It was another sunny day. Li got up and opened the door. When he was stretching his body in the courtyard, a figure flew out from a room in the inn next door and landed steadily in the courtyard. The unkempt old man looked at him and said, "The 2 items have been delivered." "And?" Li looked at him and asked. The unkempt old man nodded and said, "I've made myself clear." As he said this, he could not help but take another look at Li Yi. To be able to praise one person to the heavens and belittle the same thing to the ground in front of another person were 2 extremes. Perhaps only a scholar could do such a thing. Li cupped his hands at him and said, "Su, thank you for your hard work." The unkempt old man shook his head and asked, "When are we going back?" "It'll only take a while." Li looked at him and asked, "Why? Is Su in a hurry to go back because of something important?" The unkempt old man touched his chest pocket. During the battle with the Taoist nun, a bottle of antidote had been accidentally destroyed. That was 2 months' worth of antidote. If he returned late, his limbs would be stiff and he would be bleeding from all 7 apertures. Calculating the days, the unkempt old man should still be able to make it. He shook his head and said, "What important matter could I have?" No hurry, no hurry. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.